I need to get this story out. I think if I tell you, if I just tell someone, then I can live with the choices I've made. I'm a private investigator, and I run a moderately sized but highly successful investigation and consulting firm. My name's not important. About 3 months ago, a well-off client hired me to investigate the disappearance of her sister. Let's call her Monica. Monica was the kind of kid who would get into trouble because her parents always used their resources to get her right back out of it, and she carried that entitlement into adulthood. Most recently, after getting pulled over for a DUI and being caught holding more than a personal use quantity of some very illegal drugs in the process, Monica was forced into court-ordered treatment at an upscale psychiatric and substance abuse treatment facility called the Wasserman Center. After her mandatory treatment period was up, Monica called her family to let them know she was out and that she was taking a cab back to her apartment, evidently still disgruntled at the family's refusal to use their considerable money and influence to spare her from compulsory rehab. According to the driver, she asked to be let out downtown, saying she had an errand to run, and that was the last time anyone saw her. The police suspected she ran afoul of some of her own unsavory contacts, and her parents followed that line of inquiry, offering rewards for information and hiring private investigators. My client, though, had other suspicions. She said her sister sounded strange on the phone, her language stilted and toneless, where she was usually loud and extroverted to a fault. The cab driver, when questioned, told a similar story. None of the other investigation firms her family hired turned up anything concrete, but they did turn up rumors about the Wasserman Center, unethical experimental treatments, excessive secrecy, stuff out of the real-life horror studies of abusive mental hospitals in the early 20th century. The thing is, Wasserman also underwent regular inspections from state regulators and always passed with flying colors. There were no grounds for a police investigation, especially since Monica evidently left the center under her own power and in good health. Unfortunately, I didn't have any better luck with my own inquiries. My small but highly capable staff of ombudsmen and apprentice investigators was shut down at every turn by a bureaucratic wall of silence. But I didn't get where I am in this business by taking no for an answer. I got here by doing what other people wouldn't even consider. It turns out that it's relatively easy to get yourself committed. Pretending to be crazy in order to get locked up, after all, isn't exactly the kind of behavior people expect from a sane person. A 911 call using the right keywords to convince them I was a potential danger to myself and others was all it took to get myself picked up and sent off for a 72-hour evaluation. Contacts I'd cultivated in the police department and municipal government ensured that I was one of the limited number of psych cases from police processing who were sent to Wasserman for treatment. It's a private facility, but they contract to take a certain number of cases per month from the county as a sort of public service. Once on the inside, I was able to begin my investigation in earnest. I came in knowing it was a high-end facility that frequently catered to the rich and well-connected, but even I was surprised at how, nice the place seemed. It seemed that the center had a stated policy of cultivating a safe, nurturing environment for recovery and treatment by restricting the patients as little as possible, just enough to ensure their safety and that of the staff. This openness gave it a remarkably homey feel, and also meant that I was relatively free to move around the part of the complex where my small private room was located. I could also avail myself of the beautifully landscaped grounds that lower-risk patients were permitted to roam freely. There was, no doubt, a hidden perimeter of electronic surveillance and security personnel enclosing this park-like expanse as tightly as a razor-wire fence, but it was kept tactfully discreet from patients and visitors to the facility. Still, by my second day at Wasserman, I was beginning to think my client had sent me on a wild goose chase. I hadn't found any evidence of anything going on at the complex. There was only one place left to search, the secure wards, where supposedly high-risk patients were kept. I'd studied aerial photos of the campus. Google Earth can be a PI's best friend, and knew that, in some places, the parts of the grounds adjoining these wards were separated from the section I was allowed in by nothing more than a tall, dense hedge, which was difficult, but not impossible, for me to squeeze through unnoticed when the staff wasn't watching me too closely. What I found on the other side wasn't immediately shocking. A group of patients standing in 4 neat rows facing the same direction. At first I thought I just stumbled on some kind of organized group activity, but there was no member of the staff nearby, no one leading the class. I frowned and took a step forward. It being a bad idea to startle a patient in a mental hospital, I cautiously worked my way around the group and approached them so they'd see me in their peripheral vision before I got too close. "Hello?" I called to them, glancing around for any signs of nearby staff. They gave no response, continuing to stare straight ahead. Carefully, I approached one of the patients in the front row, an older man with just a fringe of white hair on his otherwise bald head. "Hi there," I said a little louder as I glanced around furtively. He slowly turned his head to face me, and as I saw his face, I recoiled in shock, a chill running down my spine. Hi," he replied, haltingly, blinking slightly puffy and discolored lids over unfocused eyes. I'd seen faces like that before, in photographs, when I was researching the history of abuse at mental health facilities in preparation for my investigation at Wasserman. The man had 2 black eyes, but not the kind you get in a fistfight. This was the telltale bruising that forms from the insertion of a sharp surgical probe under the eyelids and into the brain through the roof of the eye socket during a transorbital lobotomy. The elderly man with the bruised eyelids said nothing more to me, turning just as slowly back to facing front after a few seconds. As I scanned the slack, vacant faces of the patients standing in their neat rows, I noticed 2 others with similar discoloration, and one more with bruises that were almost faded. Judging by the docile and transfixed behavior of the entire group, I suspected the ones with bruising were just those who'd had the procedure most recently. They'd performed the procedure on all of them. Mass lobotomization was supposed to be a thing of the past, a dark chapter in medical history. But judging by what I saw here, it was very much alive at the Wasserman Center. I pulled out the tiny digital camera I'd smuggled into the facility with me and snapped several pictures of the patients. This was the evidence I needed. Sterling inspection record or not, I knew this would be enough to at least launch an investigation by the state medical board. I made my way back to the hedgerow and forced my way through again, squeezing my eyes closed to avoid scraping my corneas as I pushed past the tightly woven tangle of thin branches and sharp-edged leaves. When I opened them on the other side, I froze. A short, older man in an ill-fitting brown suit faced me, a grim expression on his deeply lined face. I recognized his face from my research. Standing before me was Dr. Henry Wasserman, flanked by 2 burly hospital orderlies. He sighed heavily, his expression turning slightly sad. "I really wish you hadn't seen that." I didn't struggle when the 2 orderlies patted me down and relieved me of my contraband, the tiny camera, my lockpicks, and a few other compact items I'd smuggled into the asylum in the carefully hollowed-out soles of my shoes before grabbing hold of my arms and gently but insistently guiding me away across the green. I'm an investigator, not a kung fu master, and it was pretty clear that the doctor's grim, hulking minions were more than capable of manhandling me all the way to wherever I was going if I pushed my luck. As we walked, Dr. Wasserman casually showed me the compact syringe he carried with him and raised an eyebrow pointedly. I scowled back at him, but said nothing. I realized there was no point in trying to call for help or make a scene. For one thing, if he was willing to perform mass lobotomies on the patients in his care, it seemed plausible that he'd be willing to inject me with something a bit more permanent than a sedative. Even if it was just a tranquilizer, I rated my chances of getting out of this a lot higher if I remained conscious. "Please secure Mr. Bly in room N2 and keep an eye on the door. I'll be along to join you shortly." Wasserman ordered his goons as we re-entered the center through a small side door. Me and the two orderlies parted ways with the doctor and headed down a long, narrow corridor. I hadn't been in this part of the center, leading me to conclude that we must be in one of the secure wards I'd been unable to access earlier in my investigation. "Look, you don't have to do this," I murmured softly to the pair of giants clad in scrubs. "My name is Nelson Bly. I'm a private investigator. People at my firm know where I am, and if I'm still here after 72 hours, they're going to come looking for me. Your boss won't be able to cover this up. But look, if you help me..." "Please keep quiet, Mr. Bly. We're almost there," one of the thugs said, mildly. "I'm trying to help you," I hissed. "Listen, right now you're making yourself accessories to multiple felonies, but if... Ah!" I cried out in pain and stumbled slightly, as the other orderly tightened his grip on my arm to a surprisingly painful degree. The two didn't even break their stride, dragging me forward until I got my feet under me again. "Please keep quiet, Mr. Bly," the first orderly repeated, his voice still calm and professional. Since a broken arm wouldn't improve my rapidly diminishing options for escape, I walked between my stoic captors in angry silence until we reached a plain door with a simple plastic nameplate reading N2. They opened the door and brought me inside. It was just an empty, unlit room with 4 chairs and a table in one corner. The only unusual feature was a long curtain covering a window along the wall opposite the door, unless I was much mistaken in my understanding of the center's layout. This room shouldn't have an exterior wall. "Wait here," one of the captors added as he flicked on the lights in the room. Then he looked at me and pointedly added, "We'll be just outside." I snarled as the orderlies retreated and closed the door behind them. A jangling of keys followed by a sharp click told me that they locked it as well. I paced for a minute or two, looking around frantically for any potential means of escape. The walls were painted concrete, there wasn't a hanging ceiling, so nothing to climb up to, and no one bigger than the average house cat would ever fit inside this single HVAC vent. That just left the mysterious window. I slowly walked over to the side of it and tugged on the pull cord that hung there. The curtain parted smoothly, and my eyes widened. I hadn't expected that. On the other side of the thick glass was a room that looked a lot like a small version of the neonatal ward in a hospital. There were 4 bassinets in a neat row, each one accompanied by a medical chart affixed to the end, and 1 preemie incubator. At the end of the row, a woman dressed in the loose-fitted sweats that were the patient uniform at the Wasserman Center sat in a large armchair, smiling faintly down at the small bundle cradled in her arms. The child the patient held immediately drew my eyes. It looked off. Its eyes were small in proportion to its head, which itself seemed misshapen, narrow at the top and broader in the jaw than an infant should be. The baby's nose was also sharply upturned, and its tiny ears seemed strangely flattened against the side of its head. I glanced at the other bassinets and drew in a breath, sharply. They were deformed as well, though in more pronounced ways than the child the woman held. I won't get into the details, but there were things deeply wrong with the children. God in heaven, I breathe. What the hell kind of experiments have these bastards been doing here? I turned my attention back to the adult female patient who held the oddly proportioned baby. Even if the children were experiments, why would Wasserman be allowing mental patients to handle them, unsupervised? I tapped cautiously on the glass to no response, and then again, slightly louder. The woman heard it this time, and I realized two things as she slowly looked up from the child, glancing vacantly around the room. One, she clearly couldn't see me. The glass must have been a one-way mirror. And two, I recognized her. It was Monica, the woman whose sister sent me here to investigate. My guts clenched as I realized the patient's identity and what had been done to her. With her head raised, I could see the faint shadow of faded bruises around her pale blue eyes. She'd been lobotomized, just like the patients in the grounds. I stiffened suddenly as I heard Dr. Wasserman's voice from behind me. I hadn't heard him enter. Tell me, have you begun to understand yet, Mr. Bly? I turned to see Dr. Wasserman entering the room and closing the door behind him. He carried a sheet of manila folders under one arm. I understand that you're a sick son of a bitch, I snarled, taking a step towards the door, anger rising in me as I contemplated the deformed and mutilated children I'd seen through the viewing window. Calmly, he reached into the pocket of his rumpled suit and produced a compact, suppressed pistol. I'm here to have what I hope will be a civil conversation with you, Mr. Bly, but I've no intention of permitting you to physically attack me. Why don't you have a seat? I took a deep breath. I wasn't really interested in what this twisted bastard had to say for himself, but if I was going to survive this long enough to find an opportunity for escape, I needed to be smart. So I cautiously took a seat, keeping my eyes on my deceptively innocuous captor. Thank you, the doctor said politely, and moved to the table. I see you have seen our neonatal facility, he said, conversationally, as he began laying the folders out on the table. What do you think? I think there's a special place in hell for people who hurt children, I growled. Wasserman sighed, heavily, as he continued arranging the folders on the tabletop. They looked like patient files, each one marked with a name. If there is such a place, I expect you are probably right. So why are you doing it? I snapped. Wasserman raised his eyebrows in surprise, and then nodded slowly, as if coming to a new understanding. Ah, yes, you would think that, given what you've seen. But you misunderstand, Mr. Bly. I am not responsible for the suffering of the children in this ward. Yeah? Then who is? I retorted, skeptically. Why? He began, as he lowered himself into a chair across from me, keeping his pistol pointed in my direction. Their parents, of course. Their mothers, in particular. I frowned in confusion as Wasserman gestured to the viewing window. The children there are the children of the patients. Women lost to substance abuse so completely that they could not moderate the feeding of their addiction, even for the sake of their own children. He began to list their afflictions, ticking them off on his fingers one by one. His voice had an air of clinical detachment, but I could detect a note of suppressed anger beneath the surface. Syndactyly, severe cleft palate, a heart defect requiring surgical correction, all a direct result of the substances their mothers abused while pregnant with them. I was beginning to understand. The child Monica's holding in there Her son, Wasserman confirmed. Tanner has one of the worst cases of fetal alcohol syndrome our pediatric specialist has ever seen. The external, physical signs are quite evident, of course, but only time will tell us the full extent of his mental and physical impairments. But Monica is a special case. How so? I asked. The mothers of the other children were alcoholics or drug addicts. Monica, in truth, is neither. Her disease is something else entirely, Wasserman explained. Specifically, it is a disease of evil. You can't be serious, I replied. I am quite serious, Wasserman affirmed without missing a beat. You see, Mr. Bly, many years ago, when I was in medical school, I was part of a small, I guess you might call it, a study group. This group's particular interest was the philosophy of medicine, and it was there that I first heard a fellow student broach the subject of a theory he developed while studying epidemiology. He believed that evil itself might be best understood not as an ephemeral philosophical concept, but as a disease. I'm not sure I follow, I admitted cautiously. Evil, according to this theory, is a disease that spreads in a predictable fashion, the doctor explained, from person to person through acts of evil. You have doubtless heard, for example, of how most of those who abuse children were abused as children. It is as though they were infected by the very evil that victimized them, which grew and festered inside, and in time pushed them to pass on the infection to others. That is one example, but far from the only one. So what? That's your treatment? I asked, gesturing to the woman on the other side of the window, still staring in vacant contentment at her deformed baby. Someone's evil, so you scramble their brain, and that makes them good. No, the doctor replied, shaking his head. The power to make men good is something, I think, that will remain forever beyond the reach of medicine and psychiatry. What I do is not a cure. It is more a form of quarantine. I cannot cure them, but I can deprive them of the ability to spread their disease. Cut off the hand of a thief, so he can't steal anymore. Is that it? I challenged. Certainly not, Wasserman replied with surprising vehemence. Maiming thieves, castrating rapists, such barbaric acts are evidence of the disease's spread, not its containment. The aesthetic foundation of the value of human life in society is the inviolability of the human body, regardless of the evil ends a body may have been put to. It is invariably less evil to simply kill someone outright if you truly think them worthy of such butchery. Replacing death with physical mutilation is either vindictive cruelty or moral cowardice, both of which lead only to evil in the end. But you would maim the human mind, I pointed out. You're lobotomizing people. Not as such, he objected mildly. Transorbital lobotomy, for all that it was performed with a sharpened probe, was a blunt instrument in terms of its effects. We now know far more about the functioning of the brain than we did in the days when that procedure was common. The outcome is similar, I grant you, but the methodology is far more refined. He opened one of the folders on the table and slid it towards me. It contained an illustration of a small electronic device with long filament-like wires extending from it. An implant, not unlike the brain implants used to control epileptic seizures. Only, instead of electrically disrupting abnormal brain activity at the onset of a seizure, our devices use minute electrical impulses to constantly disrupt brain activity in the frontal lobe. It can be precisely tuned to the needs of the individual patient, and the intensity of the impulses varied according to the severity of the disease they are infected with. He smiled wryly, gesturing in a manner that was rather unsettling considering that he was holding a pistol. It turned out that the most efficient method for implanting the device's probes was via transorbital insertion, which produces that characteristic bruising, unfortunately. I stared in disbelief at the diagram on the table. It seemed like science fiction, but then I had heard of the seizure-controlling implants the doctor described. That much was true, and in a way, it was easier to believe than the seemingly reasonable and conscientious little man seated across from me, regularly scrambling his patient's brains with an ice pick. The smart thing would be to go along with it, pretend to sympathize with him, but somehow I didn't think I'd be able to deceive Wasserman like that. He might be crazy, but he wasn't stupid, and I got the impression that his profession gave him uncommon facility at sussing out a liar. I shook my head. Doctor, I can accept that maybe you really do have good intentions. Maybe this really is a kinder, gentler lobotomy. But that doesn't give you the right to do this to people. Is it really for you to decide who's evil and who's good? He shook his head. A false dichotomy there, Mr. Bly. One doesn't have to fully comprehend good to recognize the disease of evil, at least in its most acute forms. He opened another file, which I saw was Monica's. As I mentioned before, Monica was not an alcoholic. In fact, she was extremely high-functioning and intelligent in how she managed her abuse of various recreational substances. She never took excessive doses and cycled between a wide array of different narcotics to avoid developing tolerances, which doesn't stop it from being self-destructive in the long term, much less an embarrassment to her wealthy parents. They threatened to cut her off if she didn't seek treatment on more than one occasion. They also refused to use their influence to spare her from court-ordered rehab when she was arrested for a DUI while carrying a large quantity of illegal narcotics, which is, of course, how she first came into our care, Wasserman said as he scanned the file. I don't see how that. She knew that eventually her parents would have made good on their threats to separate her from the family fortune, and hence from the lifestyle she'd become accustomed to, Wasserman continued, cutting me off. As we learned from independent inquiries, as well as various discussions with the patient, which Monica naturally understood to be protected by doctor-patient confidentiality, she came up with what she regarded as the perfect solution to her problem. Besides her more recreational pharmaceuticals, Monica also had a prescription for birth control pills, which she was generally fastidious about taking. That is, until it dawned on her, all she had to do to secure continuing financial support from her parents was to stop taking them. They might be willing to cut her off. She was, after all, now an adult. But they wouldn't abandon their grandchild. She was also aware of the consequences of regular alcohol consumption during pregnancy and decided that having a child with special needs would only serve a further assurance of her parents' continued support. It wouldn't impact her either way, since with her parents' money at her disposal, she could hire nurses and domestic help to do most of the work of caring for the child. That doesn't make sense, I protested, horrified. She'd have to know that they could just have taken her to court and gotten custody of the baby for themselves. I've been hired by the grandparents of kids with addict parents to help them do just that. Wasserman shook his head. While we are long past the days when merely having a child out of wedlock would constitute a social scandal for a wealthy family like Monica's, she felt sure that the scandal resulting from dragging her into court for custody would be something they'd want to avoid. I'm not at all certain she was wrong in that assumption, to be honest. He tapped the file pointedly. The point is that this is not a mental illness, Mr. Bly, not one codified in the DSM at any rate. Indeed, you've seen how we treat actual mental illness firsthand in the less secure wards. Those patients are treated with respect for their autonomy and compassion for their suffering, using only fully ethical and scientifically proven modalities, Wasserman declared, standing. But the people in these files, the ones you saw in the restricted grounds, they are not simply sick. They are evil. He flipped open a third folder laid out on the table. It contained a picture of one of the patients I'd seen on the grounds, along with a medical file. Wilson Hayes. He molested 5 children over the course of 15 years, employed as a groundskeeper for a private daycare center, but was acquitted of his crimes due to police misconduct and the unwillingness of his victims to testify. He opened another. Roberta Carlson. She believed her husband was having an affair, so she took a kitchen knife and castrated him while he slept. An incorrect diagnosis of mental illness by an inept or overly sympathetic court-appointed psychiatrist spared her incarceration. He slapped open another folder. David Gallo. Killed a family of 4 while driving recklessly. All except for the mother, that is, who will live the rest of her life bereaved of her husband and children, as well as being confined to a wheelchair. And yet, his family connections allowed him to escape punishment. He tore open another folder, then yet another, outrage rising in his voice. Murder, rape, mayhem, wanton cruelty and destruction, and all of them, all of the patients you saw on the grounds escape the grasp of the legal system. All of them free to continue spreading the disease. I sat in stunned silence as the doctor took a deep breath and composed himself once again. If there is a God, Mr. Bly, I am most certainly not him. I know this. Perhaps I have no right to do what I do. Perhaps I cannot make evil men good. But I also know that I can stop them from spreading the disease of evil to others. He said, his brow furrowed as if in pain. And if I can, then I must. Like the doctors who finally apprehended the infamous typhoid Mary, an immune carrier of her disease, and permanently exiled her to a quarantined island. I can mitigate the disease simply by removing the worst cases from the equation. He turned to the window, where a gently smiling psychiatric nurse was coaxing Monica into returning her baby to his bassinet. Her vague, vacant expression turned slightly distressed as she reluctantly handed her son back to the nurse. Then she bent down and placed a gentle kiss on his misshapen forehead. The doctor smiled, sadly. I cannot make evil men and women good, Mr. Bly, but when I take from them the majority of their capacity for will and reason and strip them of self-determination, they do get something in return. In most cases, it is simply a kind of peace, in that they can no longer hear the demons of their nature ceaselessly urging them to inflict their disease on new victims. In Monica's case, however, I like to think she has also gained something else, the capacity to love her child. I stood beside the doctor in silence for a long time, watching the nurse lead her compliant charge out of the neonatal unit before I spoke again. "Why are you telling me all this, doctor?" I asked, finally. "Because," he sighed, "you, Mr. Bly, you are not like the men and women in those files. You are not infected, which means that, convenient though it might be for me, I cannot do to you what I've done to them, nor, indeed, can I kill you for the same reason. I will not become yet another vector of the disease I have struggled so long to combat." My mouth dropped open slightly as I processed what the doctor was saying. "Yes, you are free to go, though I'm afraid I will have to hang on to the memory card from your camera," he said with a wry smile. Then his expression turned serious again. "In spite of that, I don't doubt that knowing what you know, and with the skills and resources at your disposal, you will be able to create serious problems for the center." "Yes," I allowed, cautiously, "which is why I'm surprised you're just letting me go, to be honest. As I said, I do not feel I have a right to do otherwise," Wasserman said. And then he reached out to tap pointedly on the table. "But when you leave this facility, Mr. Bly, when you are deciding what you will do next, I ask that you consider something. The procedure that has been performed on the people in these files is not necessarily irreversible, and in any case, their implants must be regularly recharged by induction in order to continue functioning. If this facility were to cease operation, if those confined here were to be rescued by the authorities, well, in time, they would regain their mental faculties and return to what they were before. The legal system has already failed to contain these individuals once, and while we are more than confident in our investigations, what would be admissible in a court of law is another matter." I looked over the files spread out on the table, contemplating the atrocities enumerated in each one, the evils perpetrated by each of the electronically lobotomized patients, and a chill ran down my spine as I imagined them walking free. "The question you have to ask yourself," the old man continued, solemnly, "is not simply whether or not you should try to destroy what I've built here. You must also ask yourself if you're willing to throw open the gates of hell in order to do so." Then, without further conversation, Dr. Wasserman collected his folders and bid me farewell. The pair of heavy-handed orderlies that had apprehended me escorted me quietly back to the non-secure ward, from which I was discharged shortly thereafter. And that's the story of how I infiltrated the Wasserman Center and discovered the secret behind Monica's disappearance. Dr. Wasserman didn't give me a chance to ask him about it, but it wasn't hard to deduce how the illusion of Monica's departure had been created. They'd simply had Monica herself make the call to her family after coaching her on what to say. Then, they most likely had a staff member with a similar enough build and experience hire the cab to take her downtown using Monica's credit card, where she then disappeared into the crowds before making her way back to the center. Cab drivers see thousands of people in passing, even if he was shown a picture of the real Monica. There's little chance he would have noticed the difference when he was questioned about it later. That's it. Like I said at the beginning, I'm telling you this because I needed to tell someone. The names have been changed to protect both the innocent and those I can't bring myself to pass judgment on. The official result of my investigation, in brief, is as follows. Despite a few spurious rumors to the contrary, the Wasserman Center is exactly what it appears to be, a perfectly fine and efficient facility dedicated to treating the mentally ill, and far ahead of the curve in terms of compassionate care and a respect for patients' rights. Though it is always discouraging to follow a seemingly promising lead to a dead end, the fact is that wherever she may be, the fault for Monica's disappearance does not lie with the center. When the woman got struck by the bus right in front of me, I didn't understand it was because I'd been rude to a waiter 10 minutes earlier. At the time, I hadn't even called myself rude at all. He'd left me without a refill for nearly 10 minutes, and all I'd said when he apologized was that sorry doesn't fill my cup. Well, that and or help your tip. But still, I thought it was a small thing, and I was irritated. And I did feel bad afterward, even left a big tip to make up for it. But in the moment that the woman left the sidewalk, only to be slammed into by the metal face of a crosstown bus, I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was thinking about the terrible, wet sound she made as she went under the wheels, the too warm spray of her blood hitting the right side of my face. As I gasped and sucked a bit of her down, I started screaming. Everyone did. It was 30 minutes before I could start absently wiping the blood off as I gave a statement to an officer. I didn't have anything to tell. I'd not even noticed the woman beside me until she stepped into oncoming traffic, and I had no idea that she might have been pushed at all, much less because of my prior sin. It wasn't until I got home and started stripping off everything that I found it. I'd almost just thrown everything away I could without getting arrested for indecency. But my coat was expensive, and I'd only had it for a year. A couple of rounds of dry cleaning might get rid of that awful... There was something in my coat's outer pocket. My first thought was an old receipt or ticket. But no, the thickness and weight was wrong. Pulling it free from my pocket, I saw it was a heavy piece of slick black paper, folded into a tight square and embossed with gold. The back, where the intersecting diamonds of folded corners were tucked together, made a beautiful tangle of gleaming scrollwork. Turning it over, I sucked in an involuntary breath. It was a pair of golden eyes. Not just the eyes themselves, but the thick, fleshy lids around them. Old, tired, pitiless eyes that stared out from the paper at me, with a look that was both weary and knowing. I chided myself for being foolish. It was just a drawing, after all. I turned the paper back over quickly, telling myself it was just to unfold it and not to get away from that gaze. Opening it up, I found the inside was a nighttime blue, glittering with lines of silver text set to mimic a small and efficient style of handwritten note. It said, "If you found this note,
You've acquired a very unique companion. There are some that call them Tengu or other things, but I prefer my own name, a Sin Goblin. This Sin Goblin is always with you now, though you cannot see or hear it. It will watch you all the time, and while this may be disquieting, rest assured that it will never harm you directly. In fact, at its core, this goblin is a very upright and moral creature, and so long as you are similarly upright and moral, you may never notice its presence at all. Unfortunately, most of us are not perfect. There may well come times where you transgress in the Sin Goblin's eyes, and when that occurs, there will be consequences. Not to you, as I said. It'll never harm you directly, but it will inflict punishment on others in your sight, and these punishments can be severe and cruel. You may not believe any of this, of course. In time, that will change. I offer this message as an explanation and a kindness, a small lamp for your feet as you move forward with your new friend close behind. Good luck. The note ended there. I almost threw it in the trash then and there, but something stopped me. Instead, I put it on the hallway table, stripped off my clothes, and scrubbed myself in the shower until my skin was hot and raw. I was so tired and shell-shocked that I didn't even think about the note again until the next day. It was about the time that I watched one of my friends die. We'd been coming back in from a smoke break. Me and Tony Lasco from the 3rd floor were ahead on the stairs going up, with Murray lagging behind us a few steps. We always took the stairs on smoke breaks. It was our half-joking attempt at mitigating the damage we were doing to our heart and lungs with every puff. But Murray was older and heavier than us, and it made him a bit slower on the climb back up. When Murray fell, he gave a little startled gasp, not loud, but high and strange enough that I turned back to look, just in time to see his legs going up as he pitched backward toward the concrete landing we just left. Plenty of time to see his head hit and turn as his weight and inertia drove him down, snapping his neck with a muffled popping sound, before his feet jittered for a few seconds, and then stilled. They told his wife later he died instantly, but that was a lie. We watched him gasp wetly for breath, his eyes rolling like a scared fish as he tried to understand why the world was suddenly upside down and closing in. I was wondering the same thing. Over the last 2 years, I've been responsible for 22 deaths, 18 cripplings, 5 blindings, 2 deafenings, and 1 animal attack that, well, that person's still in ICU and isn't expected to survive. For the first few days, I was in disbelief, but by the 5th accident in my proximity, I was being questioned by police as a person of interest instead of a suspect. When they started questioning my bosses at work, my job didn't last long. Not that anyone could actually say I'd done anything. All of it had either been around other people or in places with cameras that could be checked. There were times where it did look like someone had been shoved or pulled, but there was never any actual evidence that anyone had done it or touched them at all. By the time they got tired of talking to me, I'd already reached the point where I barely left my house, and when I did, it was like exiting a space capsule to gather resources on some alien and hostile world. I guarded everything I said or did, every look I gave, or tone I had when speaking. I'd practice phrases and expressions in the mirror, canned responses and requests for every scenario I thought might occur during my expeditions out into the world. I found remote work that required no real interaction beyond emails, and I'd spend hours scrutinizing every detail of a paragraph before hitting send. And for a time it worked. The horror started declining, and by 6 months, I was averaging only one incident every few weeks. By my first anniversary of getting the card, I was on a streak that lasted for nearly 13 months. I almost bought one of those workplace signs to hang in your office. You know, the ones that let you brag about how many days it's been since an incident. But then I thought the Sin Goblin might take offense at that, and I quickly clicked off the website. I moved to a different state in the meantime. My few remaining friends and contacts in my old town, well, I'd cut them all off out of fear of hurting them. And truth be told, they didn't seem to mind. I thought things would be easier with a fresh start. And I was right. I had my routines in place, and I remained ever vigilant. I even started to enjoy going out again, if only a little. I'd been shut away for so long, and it had been such a long time since I'd had an incident after all. I was starting to think that either I'd become a nice enough person that the goblin was satisfied, or maybe he hadn't followed me when I moved away. Then one day, I stopped in to pick up a pizza at a local place I liked. I'd called ahead, so all I had to do was politely wait my turn in line to pick up the pizza and pay. The man in front of me was being slow and annoying, fiddling with his wallet, wiping his snotty nose with his hand, and then putting in his PIN with the offending finger, pulling out his card too fast, so he had to do it all over again. The old me would have been staring daggers at him at the least, and a snide comment to him or the cashier wouldn't have been out of bounds. Now, I just hummed as I looked around the restaurant and checked my phone for any work emails while the dude finally shuffled away, offering a parting sneeze as he headed for the door. I was saying hello to the cashier, asking how they were doing, while inwardly congratulating myself on how far I'd come in the past couple of years. In so many ways, it had been bizarre and horrifying. But maybe if I'd become a better person, some good could come from it all. Heck, maybe the little guy wasn't all that. I froze. Apologizing breathlessly to the cashier, I ran for the door, opening it as quickly as I could without risking bumping anyone or knocking a passerby outside. I looked around for the snotty man, but there was no sign of him. Heart about to burst out of my chest, I raised my voice for the first time in months. "Bless you! Bless you!" He must not have heard. Or if he did, the goblin judged it as too late. Because that night, my next-door neighbor burned to death in her bed. She lived long enough to knock a small hole through the wall into my living room. Not enough to get through, of course. Just enough for me to smell her cooking and watch as she curled up like a spent match on what was left of her bed. The next day, I took $3,000 out of my savings, and I went to a private detective I found online. I didn't tell him about the Sin Goblin, of course, but I did outline a rough timeline of 2 years of me being stalked and harassed, going all the way back to the day I got a sinister message left in my coat pocket. I tried to retrace my steps at the time, figure out when I'd gotten the goblin and from who, but it never went anywhere. I couldn't remember any strange encounters that day, and all I'd done is go to an eye appointment, rode the train across town to get lunch, and then watch that poor woman get hit by the bus. I didn't hold out a lot of hope the detective would find out anything new, and at first he didn't think he had. He told me he'd spoken to people at the eye doctor's office and the restaurant I'd eaten at, but in 2 years, memories had faded, and some staff had changed. Still, no one remembered seeing or hearing anything strange that day. Turning on his computer monitor, he took out a DVD and fumbled it into his desktop. "My last option was the train," No real chance of finding a person to talk to, but I know a guy that knows a guy, he said. $1,000 of your money got me a copy of the security cam footage from the day you rode the train. I was afraid it was a waste, but then I saw this. Hitting play on the video, he leaned back so I could see it more clearly. It only took a moment for me to find myself sitting on one of the aisle seats of a crowded midday train. The quickening motion outside the windows and the gentle sway of the rail handles let me know the train was starting back up after stopping at a station. As I watched, an old woman carrying several bags of what looked like groceries shuffled from the door over to my part of the car. She came to a stop in front of me, standing there expectantly, as though she thought I'd offer up my seat. For my part, that past me never even looked up from my phone. I don't remember if I truly didn't see her or just ignored her because I didn't want to get up. But after a few seconds, it didn't matter. A kid in the row behind me stood up and gave the woman his seat, even going so far as to help her put her bags in the overhead rack before finding another seat further back. I felt anger boiling in me as I stared at the small, monochrome woman on the screen. Was that her? Was that it? Had she really ruined my life and destroyed all these other people because I didn't hop up to give her my seat? Gritting my teeth, I watched her like a hawk as the train rolled toward my station. She was right behind me. It'd be the simplest thing in the world for her to slip it into my coat without me noticing. The angle wasn't perfect, of course, but I felt like I'd see her at least look my way or lean forward when she did it. Instead, she just leaned back with her eyes closed as though she'd fallen asleep. The walls outside the train slowed again as it crawled up to my stop. Past me stood up, as did several others, but the old woman kept to her seat without stirring. The line of people streaming off the train started forward, the guy who'd given up his chair right behind me. It was fast and subtle, but right before I stepped across to the platform and out of the camera's view, I saw him drop the folded paper into my coat's left pocket. I looked up at the detective. "Tell me you know who he is," I said. The man smiled. "Well, kinda. I can't get any government records for the money you paid, but I was able to track down his online persona, which led me to an internet phone number. I tried it yesterday. It still works. Guy who answered sounds about like I'd expect your stalker to sound. So the question is, what do you want me to do now? I can give this stuff to cops here or there, but I doubt they'll do anything with it. Or if you have any more money, I can keep digging on this cat and see what... Give it to me. Please," I interrupted. He frowned. "Give you what?" I forced a smile. "The number. Please give me the number." When I got to my car, I forced myself to spend 5 minutes doing breathing exercises and rehearsing what I would say if he answered. I had to be polite and cordial while also finding out what I could and trying to get him to tell me how I could get rid of the goblin once and for all. Fingers shaking, I punched in the number. He answered on the second ring. "Uh-huh." I felt my jaw clench, but I forced myself to smile as I replied. "Hey there. Sorry to bother you, but I got your number from an associate. I know this may sound strange, but I think you may have been on a train with me a couple years ago. You let an nice elderly lady have your seat, and I was sitting in front of you. This was in..." "Oh, so you're the guy, huh?" I felt my face contracting into a frown. Yes? I think you gave me an envelope and, a new friend. There was a short bray of laughter on the other end of the line.
Shit, yeah, I did. Shit, man. How did you track me down?
Swallowing, I tried to keep my voice even. I paid a private detective. He found you from the camera on the train. Another chuckle.
Wow, that is like some CSI shit, right? Good for you.
The phone creaked slightly as I gripped it harder. Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to know how to leave my new companion behind so my life can get back to normal.
Oh, so you can go back to being an asshole like the rest of us, right? I feel ya. The thing is, you can't.
What? Why? I mean, there has to be some way to get rid of it. You gave it to me, didn't you?
Yeah, that's true. But that's like my family's thing.
There was a pause, and then he spoke again, his tone more serious.
Look, man, my family got cursed with this thing like 200 years ago, right? And the only way we can get rid of it for a while is to dump it on someone else. And they can't get rid of it without, croaking. Then it comes back to us until we find another person to help us out. And that's the deal.
That's the deal? That's the deal? I was yelling now, but I didn't care. You just kill people, ruin their lives, and it's all a big joke to you.
Nuh-uh. I don't hurt anybody. It's the goblin. And he doesn't hurt people unless you mess up.
2 weeks ago, I watched my neighbor burn to death because I didn't say bless you when a guy sneezed. I thought I had the rules figured out, but I'm not perfect, and I think he's getting stricter. There was a snort on the other end of the line.
Oh yeah, he's a tricky little bastard. He starts out a bit easy going, but the longer he's with you, the more of a stickler he becomes. I had him for 4 years before I decided to sack up and pass him on. That was after I farted at dinner on accident, and then my girlfriend got mauled by a pack of dogs on the way home.
His voice got thin and watery sounding.
I know it sucks, man. And I really am kind of sorry. But hey, at least I gave you some heads up. I even made the note all fancy so you'd take it serious.
I could hear the sarcasm in my voice as I stared at the phone. Sure. Thanks for that. Now listen, you're gonna figure out how to take this thing back or I'll find you. I will find you and I will be your own personal sin goblin until you don't have shit left. You get me? He actually sounded mildly offended when he answered.
Whoa, dude. First of all, you won't find me. I'll drop this number after this call, and I don't live in that shit city. My family's loaded, not unrelated to the curse, by the way. But for your purposes, you just need to get that you'll never find me. All you'll do is piss off the goblin and hurt more people. Is that what you want?
I started crying then. Please. I can't take it anymore. I don't want to hurt anyone else, but I want to have my life too. He sighed.
I get it. But all you have to do is don't be a dick. Okay, maybe sometimes he'll still flag you because he has some weird hang-ups, but you can figure those out. And when you make a mistake, just look at it like an act of God or something. act of goblin, right?
I don't know that I can do that.
Well, you don't have much of a choice, bud. I can't take it back even if I wanted. Which I do not want, thank you very much. I mean, you can take the permanent way out, but I discourage that. And not just because it'll mean I have to find someone else to sick that little bastard on. Just be a good person. And try not to worry about it. How hard can that be?
He took a deep breath and went on.
Though, truth time, you were pretty aggro during this call, so you might see a bit of fallout from it. Just push past it and do better, alright?
That's easy for you to...
Oh shit, my food's here.
Then the line went dead. I went to recall the number when I saw something at the edge of my vision. It was the detective hitting the asphalt in front of my car from his 12-story fall. Retching into my mouth, I put the phone away and started heading home. It took a while. Getting everywhere takes a while now. I drive slow and careful, yielding to everyone I come across, while also trying to not go too slow or cautious that I impede those around me. It is maddening and terrifying, but also necessary. I certainly don't want to offend anyone.
I drove a bus for 23 years, nights mostly. Same routes, same stops, same handful of streets that look completely different once the sun goes down and the traffic thins out. You get used to it after a while. You pull to the curb, the hiss of the doors, the quick glance at the fare box, and then back out into the road. It's repetitive work, but not in a bad way. There's a kind of comfort in knowing where you're going, even if you don't know who's getting on next. My name's Cliff Hudson. I started in my late 20s, and I stay longer than I ever planned to. At first, it was just a job that paid steady and didn't require me to sit behind a desk. I figured I'd do it for a few years, maybe save up, move on to something else. Never happened. 1 year turned into 5, then 10. Then suddenly I was the guy new drivers asked for advice. Most people think driving a bus is boring. It's not. You see more in one night than most people see in a week. Drunk arguments that start over nothing and turn into something you have to pull over for. People get on just to get warm, riding the line back and forth until you recognize them by sight. Couples fighting quietly in the middle seats like they forgot anybody else was even there. Kids trying to sneak on without paying attention, acting like you don't notice. But you notice everything. You have to. There are long stretches where nothing happens to. Just you, the road, and the sound of the engine under your feet. Street lights passing at the same pace, one after another, like a metronome. You learn to watch the mirrors without thinking about it. A quick glance to the left, then the right, then up at the rear view. You don't stare or check, it becomes automatic, like breathing. After a while, you start to recognize your regulars. The guy who always gets on at Maple and sits 3 rows back on the right, never says a word, always pays exact fare. The older woman who thanks you every time she steps off, no matter how late it is. The college kids who pile on in groups on Friday night, loud at first, then quiet by the time you drop them off. You don't know their names, but you know their faces. You know where they get on, where they get off, and what kind of night they're probably having. And then there are the ones you don't recognize. That's normal too. Cities are full of people passing through. You get used to that. You don't ask questions. Somebody gets on, they pay, they take a seat, and you keep moving. That's the job. You're not there to figure people out, you're there to get them where they're going. Still, you develop a sense for things. Not instincts like some kind of hero, just experience. You can tell when someone's about to cause trouble before they even open their mouth. You can tell when a situation is about to turn, when a quiet bus is about to get real loud. It's small things. The way someone stands in the aisle instead of sitting.
The way they look around like they're checking who's watching them. The way other passengers react. Subtle shifts. People moving seats without saying why. Most of the time it's nothing. Someone's had too much to drink, or they're tired, or they're just having a bad night. You deal with it, or it passes, and by the next stop it's over. That's 99% of the job right there. But not all of it. Every once in a while, something happens that doesn't fit into any of that. Not drunk or tired, not angry, just something else. And the thing about it is, there's never an announcement. Nothing tells you ahead of time that this is going to be one of those nights. Starts the same as any other shift. Same route and stops, same routine. Doors open, somebody gets on, and for a few seconds, everything looks completely normal. And then you check the mirror and something doesn't line up. I didn't go looking for anything like that. I wasn't the kind of guy chasing stories or trying to make sense of things that don't make sense. I showed up, did my route, and went home. That's it. But when you spend that many years driving through the same streets, seeing thousands of faces come and go, you start to notice the ones that don't belong. There are a few nights I still think about. Not every day, most of them faded like everything else does. But a handful didn't. They stayed clear like they happened last week instead of years ago. I can still remember where I was, what time it was, what the air felt like coming through the open window. I don't tell these stories much. There's no point. People hear things like this, and they start looking for explanations, or they assume you're exaggerating. Maybe that's fair. If I heard them from somebody else, I don't know what I'd think either. But I know what I saw. And after 23 years on that bus, I learned something simple. Most passengers get on, ride for a while, and then they get off. And then there are others. Story 1. The man in the back. Now this one happened maybe 10 years in, late enough that I knew the route like muscle memory, but not so late that I'd started thinking about retirement yet. It was one of those quiet nights where the city feels like it's already asleep, even though it isn't. No traffic or noise, just the hum of the engine and the occasional set of headlights passing the other way. I was running the North Line, the one that cuts through the older part of town, before looping back toward downtown. That stretch always gets thinner the later it gets. By the time I hit the middle section, I usually had maybe 3 or 4 people left on the bus, sometimes less. That night I had 2. A guy up front, a couple seats behind me, and a woman halfway down the aisle on the right side. Both quiet, both minding their own business. The kind of passengers you forget about 5 minutes after they get off. I pulled up to a stop near an empty strip of road. Not much around except a closed convenience store and a flickering street light that made the whole corner look like it was lagging a second behind itself. I remember thinking I might not even have a pickup there. And then I saw him. He was already standing at the curb when I opened the doors. Hoodie pulled up, hands in his pockets, head angled down just enough that I couldn't see his face clearly. He didn't wave or signal, just stood there, waiting like he knew I was going to stop. He stepped on without saying anything. Dropped exact fare into the box. Not coins tossed in quick, not fumbling. Placed them in one by one, like he was counting carefully. And then he turned and walked straight down the aisle. Didn't look left or right or hesitate. Went all the way to the back and took the last seat. Well, I closed the doors and pulled back into the road. At first there was nothing strange about it. People ride quiet all the time, especially that late. Some don't want to talk, some don't want to be seen. You learn not to push it. But after a minute or two, I heard something. Breathing. It wasn't loud at first, just enough that it cut through the engine noise when the bus slowed down. I checked the mirror without thinking about it. He was leaning forward in his seat, elbows on his knees, head down, shoulders rising and falling a little too hard. I looked back and kept driving. Another minute passed, and then the woman halfway down the bus shifted. I saw her glance back once, quick, like she wasn't trying to be obvious about it. Then she stood up,
walked forward, and sat closer to the front. She didn't say anything to me. People don't most of the time, they just move. And that's when I checked the mirror again. The guy in the back had slid off the seat. Not fallen, slid. He was down low, between the seats, shoulders hunched, one arm braced against the floor like he was trying to hold himself up. For a second, I thought he was having a seizure. I've seen that before. You stop the bus, call it in, trying to keep people back. That's protocol. I took my foot off the gas, and I leaned forward a little, trying to get a better angle in the mirror. "Hey, you alright back there?" No response. Just that same breathing, louder now. The bus rolled a few more feet before I hit the brakes and brought it to a full stop in the lane. I didn't open the doors yet, I just watched. His back started moving differently. Not just rising and falling, jerking. Like something underneath his skin was pulling in the wrong directions. His shoulders tightened, then snapped forward, and then held there for a second too long. The sound changed too. Wasn't just breathing anymore. There was something else under it. Low, rough. I stood up halfway out of my seat. "Sir?" And that's when his arm slipped. He caught himself on the floor, fingers spread wide, but they didn't look right. Even from the front of the bus, I could see the way they pressed into the rubber flooring. Too tense, too long. He shifted again, and his head hit the back of the seat in front of him with a dull thud. Not like he felt it, more like he didn't notice at all. The woman up front stood up behind me. "What's wrong with him?" she asked. "Stay up here," I began. Just stay up here." I stepped into the aisle a few paces. Not too far. You don't rush into something like that unless you have to. You watch first. His hoodie was pulling tight across his back now. Not like he was stretching. Like it didn't fit anymore. The fabric bunched along his shoulders, then flattened, then pulled again. Another sound came out of him. Low and wet. Not a word. He pushed himself up slowly. Not standing, not yet. Just enough to get his knees under him. And then he stopped and everything went still for a second. Then he rose. Not like a person getting up. His back came up first, hunched and uneven, one shoulder higher than the other. His head stayed down, chin tucked toward his chest like it was too heavy to lift. He stood in the aisle, and he was bigger than he had been when he got on. Not by a little. Enough that the top of his hoodie brushed the overhead bar. The bus felt smaller all of a sudden. I didn't move or speak. I just watched him through the gap between the seats. He turned slightly, like he was orienting himself. His arms hung at his sides, but they didn't hang right. There was tension in them, like they were ready to move before he told them to. The woman behind me made a small sound, almost a whisper, and he reacted to it. His head snapped halfway toward the front of the bus. Fast. I took a step back toward my seat. "Stay behind me," I said. The next stop was maybe 30 yards ahead. I could see the sign through the windshield. And I didn't think about it, I just eased the bus forward. He didn't rush, didn't charge. He just stood there in the aisle, slightly turned, like he was deciding something. The breathing came back, louder now. I reached the stop and I hit the brake. The bus hissed as it settled. And for a second, nothing happened. Then I hit the rear door release, and the back doors folded open. And he moved fast. Not running exactly. More like he covered the distance in one motion, cutting through the aisle without touching anything. He hit the back steps and was out of the door before I could even turn fully to track him. I closed the doors immediately, and I sat there for a second, hand still on the wheel. Nobody spoke. The woman behind me didn't move. I pulled back onto the road and kept going. Nobody said a word the rest of that route. When I checked the mirror again, the back of the bus was empty. No sign he'd ever been there. I drove the rest of the night like nothing happened. That's what you do. You keep the route, you make the stops, and you don't think about it too much. But I'll tell you this, in the time he was on that bus with me, whatever he was, he changed. Story 2. The Quiet Woman. I was running the east route. It passes through a mix of older buildings and newer developments, then loops back toward downtown. Usually quiet that time of night. You get a few regulars, people heading to early shifts, a couple of stragglers from the night before, but nothing heavy. Well, I pulled up to a stop just past a row of closed storefronts. There was a woman waiting. She stood a little off to the side of the sign, not directly under it. I remember that because most people stand right under the pole without thinking about it. I don't know, she wasn't hiding or anything, just positioned a little different. I opened the doors, and she stepped on. "Hello," she said. "Oh, hello," I said back. She paid without looking down, dropped the fare clean into the box, then moved down the aisle. She didn't go all the way to the back. Instead, she took a seat halfway down on the left side, one of the spots where the overhead light had burned out months earlier and never got fixed. That section always sat in a kind of shadow, even when the rest of the bus was lit. I noticed it, but I didn't think much of it. Most people just prefer the darker spots. We pulled away from the curb. At the next couple of stops, a few more passengers got on. One of them was a guy I'd seen before, mid-30s maybe, rough around the edges, the kind who talks a little too loud even when nobody's answering him. He came on, paid, and looked around for a seat. And then he saw her. I watched it in the mirror. That quick moment where someone picks a seat and changes their mind halfway through. He walked down the aisle, and he dropped into the seat next to her. I remember thinking he probably wouldn't get much out of that conversation. For a minute or two, nothing happened. The bus moved, the lights outside started to shift from deep black to that early gray, and I kept my eyes on the road. And then I heard him. "So you heading to work?" he asked, loud enough that it carried. No response. I checked the mirror. She was sitting the same way she'd been when she got on, hands folded in her lap, head slightly turned forward, not looking at him. He leaned back a little, tried again. "Long night, huh?" he said. Still nothing. And I've seen that before, people not wanting to engage. Usually the other person gets the message. He didn't though, he was persistent. And that's when I noticed the first thing that didn't sit right. She hadn't moved, not even a little. Not the kind of stillness you get when someone's ignoring you, it was exact. Like her posture hadn't shifted a fraction since she sat down. I glanced back again a few seconds later. He was talking again, saying something I couldn't make out. And she turned her head slightly, just enough to face him. And then she leaned in close. Closer than you normally would to hear someone speak. I frowned a little and adjusted in my seat, trying to get a clearer angle in the mirror without being obvious about it. The bus hit a small dip in the road, and for a second I lost the view. When it leveled out, I looked back. And the guy was slumped, head tilted sideways, resting against the window. She was sitting upright again. Same position as before, hands folded, facing forward. I waited a second. Maybe he passed out, I don't know, wouldn't be the first time. But something about it didn't match. I leaned slightly, checking the angle again. And that's when I saw it. A thin line of blood. Not a lot, just a narrow trail running down from the side of his neck, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. No movement from him, no reaction. Just still. I felt my grip tighten on the wheel. I didn't stop the bus, didn't say anything. I just kept driving. You run through possibilities in your head in situations like that. Maybe he scratched himself. Maybe he had some kind of medical issue. Maybe I was seeing it wrong. But none of those explanations held up when I looked back again. She hadn't changed at all.
Same posture and stillness. The only difference was that now every so often, I swear I could see her eyes shift. Not her head, just her eyes. Forward, then slightly up toward the mirror. I looked away immediately, kept my focus on the road. The next stop was coming up, not one she'd signaled for, but people getting off without pulling the cord sometimes. I slowed the bus. Before I even came to a full stop, she stood up. She walked down the aisle toward the front, and as she got closer, I could see her more clearly. Her clothes were clean, neat, nothing out of place. Her face was completely normal, but her eyes, they looked locked. She stopped just behind the line near my seat, and for a second, neither of us said anything. And then she looked up, right at me. There wasn't any panic in her expression, no guilt or rush, just awareness. Like she knew exactly what I had seen. And then, very slightly, she smiled. Not wide or exaggerated, just enough to show that she understood. I opened the doors and she stepped off, just down the steps and onto the sidewalk. I looked back towards the man again, getting ready to check on him, but before I could, somebody else noticed him. "Hey," they said, nudging his shoulder. "You alright?" He stirred after a second, blinking, confused. Yeah, I'm fine," he muttered. He sat up slowly, rubbing the side of his neck. "Man, I must have dozed off." He didn't say anything else the rest of the ride. He just kept looking towards the empty seat next to him. Story 3. The Sick Man. Now this one didn't start the way the others did. Most strange things on a bus begin quietly. Somebody gets on, sits down, keeps to themselves, and you notice something off a few minutes later. This one felt different before the doors even opened. It was raining that night. Not heavy, but steady enough that the road stayed slick and the windshield needed constant attention. The kind of rain that makes everything look a little dimmer than it should, even under streetlights. I was running behind schedule by a couple minutes. Nothing serious, just enough that I was paying a little closer attention than usual. That stretch of road didn't have a stop for another block or two. Still, I saw him. He was standing off to the side of the street, not under any kind of shelter, just out in the rain. One arm raised, trying to flag me down. People do that sometimes, especially when they miss a stop, or don't feel like walking to the next one. You're not supposed to pick them up off route, but after enough years, you learn when to bend that rule. I slowed the bus. Not all the way at first, just enough to get a better look. He didn't move toward the curb, didn't step closer like most people do when they see you slowing down. He just stood there, arms still up, like it was already where he needed to be. I pulled over and opened the doors. He climbed on slowly. Not drunk, not unsteady in that way, just slow, like each step took more effort than it should. "Evening," I said. He didn't say anything. He dug into his pocket, pulled out a handful of coins, and dropped them into the fare box one at a time. Some of them missed the slot and hit the plastic before sliding in. His hands shook while he did it, not violently, but enough that I noticed. Up close, he did not look right. Not in a dramatic way. No obvious injury or blood, nothing like that. Just pale. Skin looked tight across his face, like it didn't quite fit. His eyes didn't focus on anything for long. They moved past me, past the interior of the bus, like he was trying to find something and couldn't quite lock onto it. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, didn't look at me. Then he turned and walked down the aisle. He didn't sit. That was the first thing I noticed. Plenty of people stand for a stop or two, especially if they're getting off soon, but he didn't move like someone waiting for a short ride. He stopped about halfway down the bus, one hand resting on the back of a seat, head angled down slightly. I closed the doors and pulled back into traffic. There were maybe 4 other people on the bus at that point, a couple near the front, one toward the middle on the opposite side, and one in the back. No one said anything when he got on, but I saw a few glances in the mirror. Nothing unusual about that. New passenger late at night. People notice. For the first minute or so, everything stayed quiet. Then I heard the breathing. It was heavier than it should have been. Not like someone out of shape, not like someone who'd been running, just uneven. Each breath came in a little too fast, went out a little too slow. Didn't match the rhythm you expect from someone just standing there. I checked the mirror, he hadn't moved. Still standing, still holding onto the seat. Head down. But his shoulders were moving now. Not much, just enough to match the sound. I looked back to the road. Like I said before, you get used to things like that. People get sick on buses, it happens. Sometimes they ride a stop or two and then get off. Sometimes you have to pull over, it's not uncommon. Another minute passed. I checked the mirror again. He'd moved, but not much. His hand wasn't gripping the seat the same way, it had slid lower, fingers dragging along the fabric, like he was losing strength in them. His head dipped a little further forward. I tapped the brake lightly as we approached the next light. "Hey," I called back, keeping my voice steady. "You need me to stop?" He didn't answer. The light turned red, and I brought the bus to a full stop. And that's when his hand slipped completely. He dropped to one knee. It wasn't a sudden collapse, more like something inside him gave out and the rest of him followed. His other hand caught the edge of the seat, but it didn't hold. He leaned forward, then down, until he was braced against the floor. A couple of passengers stood up near the front, unsure what to do. I was getting ready to go back and check on him when the light changed. I eased the bus forward again, keeping it slow. And then his shoulders jerked. Just once. Sharp enough that I noticed immediately. Then again, a little harder. I tightened my grip on the wheel. "Sir?" I said again. No response. His arm shifted, pressing harder into the floor. And then his back arched. It's hard to explain, but it didn't look like normal movement anymore. One of the passengers near the front took a step forward. "Is he having a seizure?" they asked. I checked the mirror again. His head had turned slightly, just enough that I could see part of his face. And then he moved again, slow this time. He shifted his weight from his knee to his feet, pushing himself upward. It took longer than it should have, like his body had to remember how to do it. He stood, not fully upright, but enough to balance. His shoulders were still hunched, his head angled down, but he was standing. Nobody on the bus spoke or moved. The only sound was the engine and that breathing. I glanced ahead at the next stop. It was coming up fast. I didn't think about it too much, I just knew I wanted the doors open. I slowed the bus and pulled in. Before I came to a complete stop, I reached for the door control. The bus hissed as it settled. The doors folded open, and for a second nothing happened. And then he turned and faced the open doors. He went down the aisle, past the seats, past the empty rows, and out through the doors into the rain. I watched him through the mirror as he stepped off. He didn't look back or stop, just moved away from the bus into the dim light of the street until the rain in the distance made it hard to see him clearly. I closed the doors and sat there for a second. Then I pulled back onto the road. Nobody said anything for a while, but eventually somebody sat back up. Another person moved closer to the front. The bus returned to something like normal, but not quite. A few stops later, one of the passengers who had been sitting across from him stood up and came forward. "Hey," they said quietly. "When he fell, did you see his shoulder?" I glanced at them briefly and then back to the road. "What about it?" They hesitated. "Well, it looked like he'd been bitten." I didn't answer, I just kept driving. They stood there for another second like they expected me to say something. And then they went back to their seat. I finished the route without incident. Same stops and streets and routine. By the time I pulled back into the depot, the rain had stopped. Everything looked normal again. It always does. Story 4. The Woman in the Dress. This one was earlier in my career. Not my first year, but still close enough that I hadn't seen much. Back then, I was still paying attention to every little thing, trying to do everything exactly by the book, making sure I didn't miss anything. It was a normal night. Clear, no rain, no wind. The kind of shift where the air feels still, and the streets look a little too empty for a city. I was running one of the shorter loops, the kind that cuts through a residential stretch before reconnecting with a main road. There's a stop on that route that always felt a little off to me. Not because anything had happened there, at least not that I knew at the time. Just sat in a strange spot. One side of the street had a row of older houses set back a little too far from the road, and the other side was just a long, dark stretch of sidewalk with no real lighting except for a single street lamp that didn't reach as far as it should. I pulled up like I always did. No one was waiting at first. I almost closed the doors and kept moving. And then I saw her. She stepped into the light from just outside the reach of that street lamp. Just enough that I hadn't noticed her until she wanted to be seen. She was wearing a dress. That stood out right away. Not because it was unusual for someone to wear one, but because of the style. Looked older. Not worn or dirty, just, I don't know, not something you'd expect to see at that hour in that part of town. Light color, simple, fell straight down past her knees. I opened the doors, and she stepped down without saying anything. Didn't look at me, didn't nod, just moved past the fare box, dropped the money in, and walked down the aisle. Her steps were quiet, not completely silent, just softer than they should have been on that rubber floor. I remember noticing it because everything else was so still that even small sounds carried. She didn't go to the back, took a seat about halfway down on the right side, sat upright, hands resting in her lap, facing forward, and I closed the doors and pulled away. There were a couple other passengers on the bus, but nobody paid her much attention. She didn't draw the kind of notice that makes people stare. If anything, she blended in too easily. For the first minute or two, nothing felt out of place. I drove, checked the mirrors, watched the road, and then I glanced up at the rear view. That's when I saw it. She was sitting exactly where I expected her to be. Same posture, same position. But there was an axe in her head. The handle angled slightly backward, buried above the temple, like it'd been driven in from the side. There wasn't blood pouring everywhere. No movement, no reaction from her. I looked away. I didn't know what the hell to do. Looked back to the road. Don't judge me. You have never been in that situation. You don't react right away to something like that. Your mind tries to correct it. Bad angle, reflection, something in the mirror catching light the wrong way. I counted a few seconds in my head, and then I checked again. Same seat, same woman. No axe. Nothing. Her head was normal. Hair in place. No damage. She hadn't moved, didn't look around, didn't change anything. Just sat there like she had when she first got on. I looked in the mirror for a second longer than I should have, then forced myself to look forward again. The road was empty, streetlights passing in steady intervals, everything exactly the way it should be. I told myself that's all it was. Bad reflection, something catching the light. You see strange things in mirrors if you stare at them long enough, especially at night. Well, I kept driving. Minute passed, maybe two. No sounds from the back, no movement. The bus felt quiet again. I glanced back up at the mirror one more time, and for a split second, it was there again. Same position, same angle, a giant axe, I didn't even give myself time to process at that time. I just looked away immediately. Focused on the road, keeping the bus steady. Didn't say anything or stop. When I checked again a few seconds later, she looked normal. Exactly the same as before. Well, at the next stop, nobody got on, nobody got off. I pulled away, another block, another turn. And then after a few minutes, something else caught my attention. The seat. The one she'd been sitting in. It was empty. I frowned slightly and adjusted my angle, just to make sure I wasn't missing something. But nothing. I scanned the rest of the bus, the front, middle, back. There was nobody standing or walking. No sound of the doors opening. No stop I'd made where someone got off. She was just gone. Well, I kept driving. Didn't call it in or pull over. You learn pretty quickly that not everything you see needs to be turned into a report. By the time I finished the shift, it had settled into the back of my mind like something I'd almost convinced myself didn't happen. Almost. It wasn't until a few days later that it came back. I was talking with another driver during a break. We were going over routes, stops, the usual things. That stretch of road came up in conversation. I mentioned it without thinking. That stop with the houses set back, I said, always feels a little off. He looked at me for a second, then said, "You ever hear what happened there?" I shook my head. He leaned back in his chair. "Years ago," he began, "there was a woman lived on that block. Name was Mary Velvet." I didn't say anything, just listened. "Well, her husband killed her real bad, right in the house. Argument got out of hand and he grabbed an axe. They say he got her right in the head. Just left her there." The room felt quieter after that. I nodded once, like it was just another story. But I remembered her. I remembered the way she looked. I remembered her dress. And I remembered the axe. Story 5. The Birth. This one happened later. Not at the very end, but close enough that I'd already seen most of what the job could throw at me. By that point, I wasn't easily shaken. I'd learned how to keep steady, keep things moving, and not let panic take over when something went wrong. That night started like any other. Late shift, quiet route, hardly any traffic. I had maybe 2 passengers on board, both sitting near the front. The rest of the bus was empty. Streets were clear, lights spaced out just enough that everything felt dim but not completely dark. I remember thinking it was going to be an easy run. And then I saw him. He was standing near the edge of the road, waving both arms. Not the casual kind of signal you get from someone trying to catch a ride. This was different. I slowed the bus right away. When I pulled up and opened the doors, he rushed forward, half turning back as he did. Please, I need help," he said. Then I saw her. She was just behind him, one hand gripping his arm, the other pressed against her stomach. Her face was tight with pain, breathing sharp and uneven. She could barely stay upright. She's in labor," he began. "We're not going to make it." I didn't hesitate. "Get her on," I said. He helped her up the steps. She winced with every movement, trying to keep herself steady. Once they were inside, he guided her to a seat near the middle, easing her down as gently as he could. I closed the doors and pulled back onto the road. St. John's Hospital's it's about 10 minutes. But she can't." He didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what he meant. I could hear it in her breathing. This wasn't something that was going to wait. He knelt beside her, trying to keep her calm. "It's okay. We're almost there." She shook her head, gripping the seat. I checked the mirror. There wasn't anything I could do except keep the bus steady and moving. And then a voice came from the back. "I'm a doctor." I looked up in the mirror. There was a man I hadn't seen before. He was near the back, a few rows in from where the last passengers usually sit. Older, maybe 70s or early 80s. Gray hair under a flat cap, and an old coat. He stood up without any rush. "Name's Graham," he said as he walked forward. "Let's take a look." There was something about him that settled the air immediately. The husband moved aside without even thinking about it. You could see it in the way he shifted, like he trusted him before he even knew why. Graham knelt beside her. "All right," he began calmly. "You're doing fine. We're just going to take it one step at a time." His voice was steady. He gave instructions clearly, like he'd done it 100 times. "Help me move her back a little," he said to the husband. "Easy now, that's it." They adjusted her position across the seats. I kept the bus as smooth as I could, easing off the brakes early, taking turns wide, doing everything I could not to jolt the bus. I watched through the mirror. Her breathing got sharper, more frequent. She cried out once, then again, gripping the edge of her seat. "You're all right," Graham said. "Stay with me, just like that." I'd never seen anything like it. There was no panic in him. None. I just drove. Time stretched a little in that moment. Hard to say how long it actually took. Could have been a few minutes, but it felt longer. And then everything went quiet, just for a second, then a baby crying. It filled the bus in a way nothing else had that night. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The husband did too. He leaned forward, hands shaking, looking down. Oh my God, he said. Graham moved carefully, finishing what needed to be done, then nodded once. "Healthy," he said. "You've got a healthy baby." The relief that followed was immediate. The husband kept thanking him over and over, and Graham just gave a small nod. Well, we were coming up on the next stop, and I slowed the bus. Graham stood up slowly. He adjusted his coat, and then turned toward the front. As he walked up the aisle, he glanced at the couple. He smiled at them. Then he walked past, caught my eye, and gave me a small wink. I opened the doors, and he stepped off. Outside, the street was empty. There was a light fog rolling across the road, low to the ground, drifting slow, and I watched him through the windshield. He walked forward at the same steady pace he'd had the entire time. Just moved into the fog, step by step. His outline softened as the mist thickened, faded, and then he was gone. Well, I finished out my years on that route. Same streets and stops, same routine I'd been running for more than 2 decades. By the end of it, I could have driven it with my eyes closed if I had to. Every turn, every light, every place where someone might be standing, waiting for you to pull up and open the doors. Most nights were exactly what you'd expect. Quiet. People getting on, people getting off. A few conversations here and there. The usual things you deal with when you're driving late. Nothing that follows you home, nothing that sticks. But not all of it fades like that. There are a few nights that stay clear, sharper, like they never really settled into the past the way everything else did. I still think about that man in the back sometimes, the way he moved, the way he stood there in the aisle like he didn't belong inside his own body anymore, the way he got off without hesitation, like the bus was just one small stop in something else he was dealing with. And the woman in the dress, that one definitely sticks with me. And there are others. You don't forget things like that. Not completely. But if I'm being honest, the one I think about the most is Graham. Not because it scared me, it didn't. That night, it could have gone a different way. I knew it the second I saw them standing there in the road. The way he was waving, the way his wife could barely stand. Didn't take much to figure out how bad it could have gotten if things didn't line up just the right way. And then somehow they did. He was just there. Calm and steady. Didn't rush or hesitate, just stepped in, did what needed to be done, and made sure everything turned out the way it was supposed to. I've thought about that more times than I can count. Tried to remember if I missed him getting on the bus. Tried to place him somewhere on the route where it would make sense. I never saw him again. Never heard anything. My name is Brian Walker. I work as a garbage collector for Marion, Ohio Sanitation, Route 7 out of Marion, Ohio. It's not too complicated. You show up before sunrise, you ride the back of the truck, and you throw whatever people leave at the curb into a steel box that crushes it down until there's room for more. Most days, that's all it is. I have had a bunch of jobs over the years. Warehouse work, a few construction sites, one stretch driving a plow truck during the winter. Nothing really stuck. This did. The pay's steady, the hours are predictable, and once you get used to the routine, it's almost automatic. My shift starts at 4:30 in the morning. The yard sits on the edge of town, past a row of auto shops and a fenced lot full of old equipment. When you pull in, the place is already alive. Diesel engines warming up, floodlights buzzing overhead, trucks lined up in rows, each one assigned to a route. I am assigned to truck 12. It's a rear loader with a dented tailgate, a compactor that hits harder than it should, and a hydraulic system that jerks if you don't ease it. You learn its quirks fast, or it'll throw you off the back step. My driver is Ethan Cooper. He's been doing this for over a decade. Doesn't talk much, doesn't waste time, and doesn't really make mistakes. First thing he told me was to keep one hand on the rail at all times and not to jump off the truck until it's fully stopped. That's how most of the job goes. Simple rules, practical stuff. You follow them, you're fine. Our route starts in the residential blocks near downtown. Tight streets, parked cars, bins lined up along the curb. And then it opens up into the outer neighborhoods, and after that, turns rural. Longer drives between stops, fewer people, and quieter roads. By the end of the route, you're out past where the sidewalks disappear. Houses sit further back from the road, some look lived in, and some don't. The work itself is repetitive. You hop off the back, grab the bags or tip the bin, toss everything into the truck, then step back on before the driver rolls forward. The compactor cycles every few minutes, pushing everything down into the body so there's room for the next load. You stop noticing what you're picking up after a while. You zone out. All feels the same through gloves, you know? Weight, shape, movement. You grab it, you throw it, you move on. That's how it's supposed to be. Before my first shift, I had to check in with the route manager. His name is Daniel Brooks. He handles scheduling, assignments, maintenance reports, everything that keeps the routes running. He walked me through the standard stuff first. Safety procedures, pickup schedules, who to call if something breaks down. And then he handed me a single sheet of paper. Wasn't part of the normal paperwork. No logo, no header. Just a laminated page with 6 lines printed on it. The plastic was worn, edges smoothed down like it'd been passed around for a long time. "Keep this with you," he said. I glanced at it. Each line was labeled as a rule. Figured it was just extra guidelines, stuff specific to the route, maybe things that had caused problems before. "Read it before you start," he added. I nodded and slipped it in my jacket pocket. He held my eye for a second longer. "Follow it." And that was it. I didn't think much of it at the time. First day in a new job, you're focused on not messing up the basics. Stay balanced on the truck. Don't miss stops. Don't get in the way of the truck, you know, that kind of thing. We pulled out of the yard just before 5. Still dark. Headlights cutting through the street, engine steady under us. Ethan didn't turn on the radio, just drove. The first part of the route was exactly what I expected. Bins lined up at the curb, Tide bags, the usual thing. I got into the rhythm fast. Step, lift, throw, step, lift, throw. By the time the sky started to lighten, my arms were already sore and my gloves were streaked with grime. Normal day. We finished just before noon and headed back to the yard. I climbed down from the truck, stretched out my shoulders, and I pulled my jacket tighter against the wind. Ethan shut off the engine and sat there for a second. "You read the sheet?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, not yet." He nodded. "Read it," he said. And then he got out of the truck and walked off without another word. I stood there for a moment, listening to the ticking of the engine cooling down. And then I reached into my pocket and I pulled out that laminated sheet Daniel Brooks had given me that morning. 6 lines. I looked down at him, standing there in the middle of the yard, and read them for the first time. Here's the first one. Rule 1. Never open a trash bag that is tied with a yellow rope. That was the first line on the sheet. Not be careful, not use proper lifting technique. Just that. Never open a trash bag that is tied with yellow rope. I remember reading it twice, standing there in the yard, trying to figure out what kind of situation would even require that to be written down. People tie bags all kinds of ways. Twist ties, knots, duct tape if they're lazy. I'd never seen anyone use rope, let alone bright yellow rope. I figured it was one of those things you pick up on certain routes. I don't know. Maybe somebody had tried to secure construction debris or something heavy. Maybe it was a safety thing. Either way, it didn't seem like a big deal. The next morning, I saw one. We were about halfway through the residential section, early enough that most people were still inside. Lights on in the houses, coffee brewing, that kind of thing. The bins were lined up along the curb like usual. I hopped off the back of the truck as we slowed, grabbed the first bin, tipped it in, and then I stepped over to the next one. The lid was heavier than normal. When I lifted it, I saw the bag right away. Black plastic, thick, not the cheap kind, and wrapped around the top, tight, multiple loops, was a length of bright yellow rope. Not tied like a knot, wrapped over and over again, like whoever did it didn't want it coming loose under any circumstances. I just stood there looking at it, and then I reached in. The rope was rough under my gloves, thicker than it looked. I grabbed the bag at the top and tried to lift it, and it didn't budge. Not at first, anyway. I adjusted my grip and pulled harder, and it came up slow, like it was stuck to the bottom of the bin or weighed down with something real solid. Not loose trash, not food waste, something dense. I got it over the lid of the bin, and I held it there for a second, balancing the weight. "Don't." Ethan's voice cut through the cab. I looked up. He had his arm resting out the window, watching me. "That's one of them." I glanced back down at the bag. "Huh?" "Don't open it. Don't mess with it. Just throw it," he said. I frowned. I wasn't going to open it. "Good, don't," he said. There was something in his tone that made me stop asking questions. I turned back to the truck, and I heaved the bag into the rear compartment. And it hit harder than it should have. A solid, heavy thud against the metal. For a second, nothing happened, and then the bag shifted. It wasn't like it settled or the weight redistributed. It pushed outward. A slow, uneven movement from inside the plastic. I froze, and it stopped. I told myself it was just the way it landed. Something inside sliding into place, that's all. The compactor kicked on. The hydraulic system whined as the blade came down, pushing the pile forward. The bag disappeared under pressure with everything else, flattening out of sight. I stood there for a second longer and grabbed the next bin. Step, lift, throw. By the time we finished that street, I'd already convinced myself I imagined it. At the next stop, I climbed back onto the rear step as Ethan pulled forward. "You'll see one of those," he said. The truck rolled over a crack in the road, the whole frame rattling under me. Wind pushed against my jacket as we picked up speed. "Just don't open them," he said. That was it. We moved on, and a few streets later I saw another one. This time the bin was already tipped slightly, like someone had set it down wrong. The lid was half open, just enough to see the top of the bag inside. Same thing. Black plastic, tight wrap, yellow rope. I didn't touch it. I closed the lid and stepped back onto the truck without saying anything. Ethan didn't look at me, he just drove. We skipped that one completely. Well, the rest of the route went normal, or normal enough that I stopped thinking about it. The work pulls you back into rhythm fast. You don't have time to stand there analyzing things, you just move. By the end of my shift, my arms were shot, my shoulders tight, and my mind was already shifting toward getting home, eating, and not thinking about trash for the rest of the day. But that night, I kept thinking about the way the bag moved. The next morning, I got my answer. We were running the same route, same order, same timing. The streets were quiet, the air a little colder than the day before. Everything felt exactly the same. Until we hit the third block. There was a bin sitting out by itself at the curb. No house lights on behind it, no car in the driveway, and just the bin. The lid was closed. As I stepped off the truck, I noticed something else. There was no frost on it. Every other bin on the street had a thin layer of white across the top from the overnight cold. This one didn't. I walked up to it and lifted the lid. Inside was a single bag, black plastic, yellow rope, tighter than the others, wrapped so many times around the top that it dug into the plastic, cutting deep lines into it. I didn't reach in, I just stood there looking at it. "Leave it," Ethan's voice again. I didn't argue. I closed the lid and turned back, and as I stepped away, I heard something. A dull, soft thud from inside the bin. I stopped, and then I kept walking. I climbed back onto the truck and grabbed the rail. Ethan didn't look at me this time, he just pulled away. We drove in silence for a few minutes, and then he said, "Guy before you didn't listen." I kept my eyes on the road behind us. "Yeah, what happened?" "He opened one," Ethan began. "He cut the rope. Said he thought it was something valuable. Tools, maybe. Something someone didn't want picked up by mistake." I didn't say anything. "He opened it right there on the curb," Ethan continued. "Middle of the route." "What was in it?" "Oh, I didn't see. I didn't get close enough." I felt my grip tighten on the rail. "What do you mean?" "I was in the cab," he continued. "He was behind the truck. I heard him drop the bag, heard him say something, not loud, just confused. And then I heard the plastic tear. I got out, walked around, and he wasn't there." "What about the bag?" I asked. "Gone," he said. We didn't talk after that, and the rest of the route felt different. Every bin I opened, I checked the top first. No rope. We finished and headed back to the yard, same as always, but I wasn't thinking about the job anymore. I was thinking about the way that first bag had moved when I threw it in, and the sound I heard in that second bin. And what happens when you cut something open that wasn't meant to be opened? After that day, I understood something I hadn't before. Some of the things we pick up on that route, they're not trash. Rule 2. If a trash bin is already in the street, don't move it. That one didn't make sense to me first either. People leave bins in the street all the time. They forget to pull them back, or the wind knocks them over, or somebody drags them out too far. Half the job is dealing with stuff like that. Adjusting, moving things where they need to be so you can do the pickup clean. So when I read that rule, I figured it was just another safety thing, you know? Don't drag bins around in traffic. Don't put yourself in a bad position behind the truck. That kind of logic. It didn't sound like anything serious. The first time I saw one, it didn't even register. We were heading into the rural stretch, past the line of the close houses. The road narrowed, no center line, just cracked asphalt and ditches on both sides. Fields stretched out, low and empty, with fences that looked like they hadn't been fixed in years. About a mile in, Ethan slowed down. There was a trash bin sitting in the middle of the road. Not tipped over or knocked sideways, just placed perfectly upright in the dead middle of the road. Lid closed. No house nearby. The closest one was set back at least 100 yards down a gravel driveway. No lights on, no movement. I hopped off the back of the truck and started walking toward it. "Leave it," he said. I stopped halfway there and turned back. "It's in the road," I began. "We're supposed to clear these." "Not that one." I looked at the bin again. There's just a bin. Standard county-issued plastic, same size and color and wheels. "What's the issue?" I asked. Ethan leaned slightly out of the window, resting his arm on the frame. "Get back in the truck." I hesitated for a second longer, and then I turned around and stepped back onto the rear platform. Ethan didn't drive around it right away. He slowed, eased the truck slightly to the left, and then passed it with just enough space that the side mirror cleared. As we went by, I glanced down at it. I think I saw the lid shift just a little, like something inside it pressed upward and let go. I faced forward again. We didn't talk about it. The next few stops were normal. Bins at the curb, tied bags, nothing unusual. But I kept thinking about that one sitting out in the middle of the road. It didn't look like it'd been blown there. Looked like it'd been put there. On the way back through that same stretch, I looked for it again, and it was gone. I figured somebody had moved it. Maybe the homeowner came and dragged it back in. Maybe another truck cleared it. That's what I told myself. The second time I saw one, I understood the rule better. It was 3 days later, same route, same stretch of road, only this time it was closer. We turned onto a narrow lane that cut between two fields, no houses for a good quarter mile, just open land and a line of trees running along the right side. The bin was dead center in the lane, same as before. Upright, lid closed. Ethan slowed again. I didn't move this time. I stayed on the step and watched. We rolled closer, the engine idling low. Something was different about this one. The plastic looked cleaner. Not new exactly, but not worn down like the others. No scratches or dirt streaks, just a smooth, dark surface. As we got within about 10 feet, the lid shifted slightly, just enough to create a thin gap, and I saw darkness inside. No bags or visible trash, just empty space. And then something shifted beneath the darkness. The lid dropped back down. Ethan didn't stop. He steered the truck around it again, keeping a wider distance this time. The tires rolled onto the edge of the dirt shoulder as we passed. I kept my eyes on it. As the back of the truck cleared the bin, one of the wheels turned, slowly, just a few inches, and then it stopped. I gripped the rail tighter. "Did you see that?" I asked. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, that's why we don't touch them." "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. We drove on, and I didn't ask again. Rule 3. If you hear knocking from inside the compactor, do not stop the truck. You know, the compactor is loud. Supposed to be. Metal, hydraulics, pressure, everything about it makes noise. Grinding, crushing, shifting. You get used to it fast. After a few days, your brain filters it out completely. So the idea that you'd hear something specific, something you could pick out from all that noise, didn't seem realistic. At least not at first. The first time it happened, I didn't even recognize it. We were about halfway through the route, just finishing up the outer neighborhoods. The truck was already more than half full, bags stacked high in the rear compartment, compressed down every few stops to make space. I was on the back step, one hand on the rail, the other resting near the edge of the hopper, standard position. Ethan slowed for the next stop. I hopped off, cleared 2 bins, tossed everything in, and then stepped back up. As we pulled away, the compactor kicked on. The blade came down, pushing everything forward with that familiar heavy shove. Metal against metal, pressure building, then releasing. Normal. And then I heard it. A soft knock, almost loud under the sound of the machine. I didn't react. Probably just something shifting inside. Loose object hitting the wall. Happens all the time. We rolled forward another 20 feet, and that knock came again. This time I noticed it, not because it was loud, because it didn't match anything else. I leaned slightly toward the back, listening. Nothing. Just the hum of the engine and the rattle of the truck over the road. I shook it off. Next stop, step lift throw. Back on the truck, and we pulled forward again. And then it came again. 3 knocks in a row. Clear, separated. Not metal shifting or debris falling. It was 3 knocks. I froze. The compactor wasn't running. The truck wasn't hitting bumps. There was nothing that should have made that sound. I leaned back, looking into the rear compartment. All I could see was crushed trash. Flattened bags, cardboard, loose debris packed together under pressure. No movement or gaps, nothing out of place. "Stay up there," Ethan said. I hadn't realized I'd shifted my stance. "You hear that?" I asked. "Yeah, I hear it," he said. "What is it?" Ethan didn't look back. "Don't worry about it." "Hey, that's not an answer," I said. "It's not your problem," he replied. There was another knock, single this time, louder, right behind me. I turned. The sound had come from the upper section of the compactor, not the lower press area. Higher than it should have been. "Hey, I'm checking it," I interrupted. I walked to the back of the truck. The hopper was still partially open. The last load sitting just inside, not yet compacted. I leaned in slightly and nothing. Just bags. And then the knock came again. Right behind the inner wall, close enough that I could pinpoint it. I reached for the control lever. "Brian?" Ethan's voice again, different. "Don't. I just want to see. Don't." Another knock. And then a voice. "Hey." I froze. It came from inside the compactor. "Hey," it said again. Ethan was out of the cab now, walking toward me. "Get back on the truck." "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Yeah." "Someone's in there." The voice came again. "Please." Something about that word hit different. "Don't," Ethan said. The voice changed then. "Brian?" I stopped. "Get back on the truck," Ethan said. And I didn't argue this time. I stepped back onto the platform. Then we pulled forward. There was no more knocking after that. We finished the route without another incident. When we got back to the yard, I didn't move right away. I just stood there on the back step staring at the compactor. Ethan shut off the engine. "You stopped," he said. "Don't do that again." He opened the door and got out. I stayed where I was. After a minute, I climbed down and walked to the back of the truck. I reached up and hit the release. The compactor opened. The load shifted slightly as the pressure released. I stepped back. Nothing inside looked out of place. Just trash. There was no way anything could have been inside. Rule 4. Do not collect trash from the house on Route 7 marked with a blue X. That one stood out immediately, because it was the only rule that mentioned a specific place instead of a general situation you might run into anywhere on the route. Up until that point, everything had been about objects or sounds or things that could happen during the job, but this one pointed directly at a single location, like it had a history behind it. I didn't ask about it right away, mostly because I hadn't seen anything like that yet, and I didn't want to start sounding like I didn't understand how the job worked. You pick things up as you go, and if something matters enough, someone usually tells you before you make a mistake. It showed up about a week later, toward the end of the route, when we were already running the same stretch and the houses were spaced far enough apart that each stop felt separate from the last. The road curved slightly through a patch of older properties, the kind with long driveways, aging fences, and buildings that had been standing long enough to lean in small ways you wouldn't notice unless you looked carefully. Ethan slowed the truck before we even reached the driveway, which was unusual because he normally kept a steady pace unless there was something directly blocking the road or forcing him to adjust. I stepped off the back automatically and started toward the curb, expecting to grab the bin like any other stop. And then I saw the mailbox. It had a blue X spray painted across the front, thick lines crossing corner to corner in a way that didn't look accidental or decorative. The paint had dried unevenly, dripping slightly down the sides, like it'd been done quickly but deliberately. I stopped walking and looked back at the truck. Ethan was already watching me. "That's the one," he said. I followed his gaze back to the property. The house sat about 40 yards off the road, partially hidden behind a line of overgrown bushes that had spread out past whatever boundary they were supposed to stay within. The windows were covered, either boarded or dark enough that I couldn't see inside, and the front door was closed with no visible damage or sign of recent use. The trash bin was sitting at the edge of the driveway, lid closed, positioned exactly where you'd expect it to be for a normal pickup. "Just leave it," Ethan added. I nodded, but I didn't move right away, because everything about the setup looked completely ordinary, except for the blue X on the mailbox and the fact that we were being told to skip it. There was no visible damage, no unusual markings on the bin itself, nothing that would explain why this one stop was different. I walked a few steps closer before stopping again, keeping enough distance that I wasn't actually touching anything, but close enough to get a better look. And that's when the door opened. I didn't see anyone step out. I didn't hear any footsteps on the porch. But I knew the door hadn't been opened before. "Brian," Ethan said. I didn't respond right away, because I was still looking at the doorway. The door stayed partially open, and I thought I could see barely a tall figure behind it. It almost looked like they were smiling at me. I took a step back. "Leave it," Ethan said. And this time I didn't hesitate. I turned around, walked back to the truck, and I climbed onto the rear step without looking back again. As we pulled away, I kept my eyes forward and focused on the road ahead, but I could feel the presence of that house sitting behind us. We didn't talk about it on the way out of that stretch, and Ethan didn't offer any explanation for why the rule existed or what had happened there before I showed up. When we got back to the yard, I took the sheet out again and looked at the fourth line, reading it slower. Do not collect trash from the house on Route 7, marked with a blue X. I folded the sheet and put it back in my jacket, because I didn't need any more detail than that to understand the rule. Some stops, they're not part of the job, and whatever is inside that house, I think it's evil. Rule 5. If a trash can follows the truck, don't look back. That one didn't make sense in a practical way, but by the point I'd already stopped expecting these rules to follow normal logic or fit into anything I could explain with the job itself. You read something like that and you assume it's, metaphorical or exaggerated. Something written down after a weird incident that got retold enough times to sound stranger than it really was. The first time it happened, we were finishing the last stretch before heading back toward town, and the road was empty enough that you could hear the truck echo off the tree line on both sides. I was on the rear step like usual, one hand on the rail, watching the road behind us out of habit. And that's when I heard the wheels. Not the truck's wheels. Something lighter, uneven, rolling over the road at a different rhythm that didn't match our speed or the surface beneath us. I ignored it at first because there are always sounds out there. Branches, debris, loose gravel. But this stayed consistent longer than it should have. Then Ethan spoke without turning around. "Don't look back," he said. I didn't ask why. I just kept my eyes forward and focused on the edge of the road, counting the fence post as we passed him to give myself something steady to track. The sound stayed with us, though, matching our pace. After a few seconds, curiosity got the better of me. I didn't turn all the way, just enough to glance over my shoulder. And a trash can was rolling behind the truck. Same size, same type as the ones we pick up all day. But there was nobody pushing it and no slope in the road that would explain that movement. I faced forward again immediately. "Don't look at it." "I just looked for a second," I said. "That's too much." We kept moving. The sound didn't change. It was still there, still rolling. I kept my eyes forward, but I could feel it behind us now. After a minute, the sound stopped all at once. No slowing or final roll, just silence. I didn't turn around again. We finished the route without seeing it a second time, and Ethan didn't bring it up again once we got back to the yard. There was no explanation offered and no follow-up, which told me absolutely nothing. All I know is that if a trash can follows you, don't look back. Rule 6. Never finish the route after sunset. That was the last rule on the sheet, and it was the only one that tied everything together in a way that felt like it had less to do with individual situations and more to do with the route itself. Up until that point, every rule had been about something specific. Bags, bins, sounds, a house. But this one was about timing, and it didn't explain why that timing mattered. For the first couple of weeks, we never came close to breaking it. The route was structured so that we were done well before sunset, even in the winter when the daylight dropped off early. Ethan kept a steady pace, never rushed, never slowed down more than necessary, and we always made it back to the yard with time to spare. That changed on a Friday when we got a late start. One of the trucks had gone down in the yard that morning, and everything backed up while they reassigned routes and moved equipment around. By the time we pulled out, we were already behind schedule, and Ethan didn't say much about it, but I could tell he was paying closer attention to the clock than usual. We moved faster through the residential section, skipping anything that wasn't clearly set out and keeping stops tight. The outer neighborhoods took longer than expected, and by the time we hit the rural stretch, the sun was already low enough that the light had started to flatten out across the fields. I noticed it before Ethan said anything. "Hey, we're late." "I know," he replied. He didn't speed up, which felt wrong in that moment, because every instinct you have in a situation like that tells you to move faster and make up time. Instead, he kept the same pace, same spacing between stops, like he was trying to maintain control instead of catch up. Well, the first sign that something was off, it came when we turned onto that last stretch of the route. Every house had its trash out. Not some of them, all of them. Bins lined up evenly along the road, lids closed, positioned at the exact same distance from the curb, like somebody had measured it out and set them exactly in place. The road had been quiet earlier that week, with a few houses skipped and others with nothing set out at all, but now it was completely full. I stepped off the truck and I walked to the first bin. The air felt different, still, not quiet in a normal way, but heavy. All the bags were stacked perfectly neatly, each one tied tight. No loose ends, no irregular shapes pressing against the plastic. They looked arranged. I didn't question it. I grabbed the first bag and tossed it into the truck. It landed with a dull weight that didn't match how it looked. Keep moving. We went down the line, stop by stop, clearing bins faster than usual, but not rushing enough to lose control of what we were doing. The sun dipped lower, the light shifting from gray to orange, and then fading into something darker as the horizon swallowed the last of it. By the time we reached the midpoint of that stretch, the sun was gone. Ethan stopped the truck. "Get on." "I'm already on," I replied. "Well, stay on." I held the rail and looked ahead. The rest of the road was still lined with bins, all of them full. We didn't move forward right away. Ethan sat there for a second, engine idling, his hands resting on the wheel without tightening or adjusting. "You know, they shouldn't be all out," I said. "I know." "Then why are they?" He didn't respond. I looked at the nearest bin again, and the lid shifted. It lifted slightly, and then it settled back into place, like something inside had pressed upward and released. I turned my head toward the house behind it. The front door was open. Not wide, but just enough to show it wasn't closed anymore. There was someone standing there, far enough back that I couldn't see details, but close enough that I could tell they weren't moving. "Ethan," I said. "I see it," he replied. I looked at the next house. Same thing. Door open, figures standing inside, still. They look like zombies," I said. The word came out flat, like it'd been sitting there waiting for me to say it. Ethan nodded. I looked back at the bins. Every single one of them shifted. Lids lifting. Not all the way, just enough to show movement underneath. The bags inside pressed upward, stretching the plastic in slow, uneven shapes that didn't match anything that should have been inside him. "We're not finishing," Ethan said. "No, we're not," I agreed. He put the truck in gear and we drove out of there fast. As we turned, I looked down the rest of the road. Every house and every doorway had a figure standing inside, and all of them were facing the road. The bins closest to us tipped slightly, not falling over, just leaning forward, like something inside was shifting its weight toward the truck. I didn't look any longer than I had to. We straightened out and we drove back the way we came. Nobody followed, no bins rolled, no knocking came from the compactor. Everything stayed exactly where it was. Thankfully. Later, I took the sheet out and read the last line again. Never finished the route after sunset. And now I knew why. Zombies. Well, after that night, we never ran late again. Didn't matter what broke down in the yard, how backed up the schedule got, or how many routes had to be reassigned. If the timing even came close, Ethan would cut sections without hesitation. Entire streets would get skipped, bins left untouched, and nobody ever questioned it. I kept working the route, same truck and stops, but I stopped treating any part of it like routine. I checked every bag before I touched it. I avoided anything that didn't sit right. I didn't look back when I wasn't supposed to, and I never, ever stayed out past sunset again. A few weeks later, they assigned a new guy to cover a second truck on our route. Mark Sullivan. Mid-20s, talkative, the kind of guy who asked questions about everything because he assumed there was always a reasonable answer behind it. First morning I saw him, he was joking with one of the drivers, laughing about the smell, saying it wasn't as bad as people made it out to be. I watched Daniel Brooks hand him the same laminated sheet, same worn edges and 6 rules. Mark looked at it, gave a small grin, and folded it in half like it was just another piece of paper he didn't need. I didn't say anything. You know, there's no way to explain those rules to someone who hasn't seen what they're there for. And even if you try, it just sounds like you're messing with them or trying to scare them off. His truck left the yard a few minutes before ours that morning. We crossed paths once on the route, just a quick pass on one of the outer roads. He was riding the back step, one hand on the rail, relaxed like he'd already settled in. He gave a casual wave as he went by. And that was the last time I saw him. By the end of the day, his truck was back in the yard. Engine off, empty. Daniel Brooks walked out, looked at it for a few seconds, and then told maintenance to move it into line. Later, I found out that apparently Mark had seen something, and he took off running like a bat out of hell. The next morning, Route 7 ran like usual. Ethan drove, I rode the back. We followed the same path, hit the same stops, moved through the same stretches of road without saying much. When we reached the section where Mark had been working the day before, Ethan didn't slow down. I didn't step off the truck. I didn't look inside any of the trash cans. I didn't need to confirm anything, because by then, I understood something simple about this job. The rules aren't there to make the work easier. They're there so you survive. My name is Jesse, and I do weird jobs for money. That is the cleanest way I know how to put it. The internet would tell you it's called urban exploration or haunted tourism, though it's a lot more than that. People hire me when they don't want to call the cops or can't call anyone else. When a landlord needs someone to spend a night in a haunted Tokyo apartment to prove it's been spiritually cleansed. Yeah, that's me. When a backyard grave starts sinking a little too fast after a quiet funeral, and the family needs someone to sit out there overnight just in case the soul gets restless. That's me too. I get these jobs from message boards, private DMs, Craigslist sometimes. I've walked into houses with blood dried on the ceiling. I've documented basements that were still chained shut from the inside. I've stayed in motels where the clerk gave me 2 keys just in case the one they left behind doesn't work. People say you can't live off this kind of work. And they're right, in the normal sense. I don't have a mortgage. I don't have a car newer than a decade ago. But I've got food, gas, a place to park, and a roof over my head when I need one. It's an unstable but exciting life. Forced minimalism, one would say. Now my specialty is locations. Places no one wants to go, but can't leave alone. Murder houses. Abandoned gas stations. When a guy saw lights in the sky back in '84 and never came home. Tunnels with no blueprints, barns with padlocks on the inside, and lakes that were never on the map to begin with. The kind of spots where, if you say the right name in a diner 5 towns over, someone will drop their fork and say, "No one goes there anymore." That's where I go. I have a small blog that is weirdly active. I post under the name fieldmanual_07 on Reddit. If you've seen it, you already know what I do. If you haven't, don't bother unless you're ready to lose a few nights of sleep. My audience is small but loyal. They're the kind of people who read every police report and still ask what didn't get filed. They send me tips too. Sometimes the really good jobs start in my inbox with just a screenshot and the words, "You'll like this one." I didn't get into this line of work to upload YouTube videos. Good thing too, since I barely know how a camera works. I have the small blog and that's about it. I've just always loved strange, unexplainable things. Been that way since I was a kid. Always drawn to the things other people tiptoe around. If a teacher said, "Don't open that door," I'd have it halfway open before they finished the sentence. I used to think I'd grow out of it. Turns out you grow into it. Which, surprise, surprise, my parents did not like one bit. And my biggest supporter is my dog. Man's best friend and certainly mine. His name is Barney. Barney's been with me for most of my life. I got him when I was a kid, back when my entire world was school, Saturday morning TV, and whatever stray thought drifted through my head. He was a small rescue puppy then, all oversized paws and sharp little teeth, and I named him after the first show I saw on Nickelodeon that afternoon. My parents said I could have done much worse. I guess they just felt relieved I didn't name the dog SpongeBob. That actually would have been a good name. They grew fast. Some kind of shepherd mix, according to the vet, with the sort of build that makes people think twice before stepping too close. But he's gentle, loyal in that old-fashioned way, where he checks on you every few minutes to confirm the world hasn't changed while his back was turned. When I started doing the work, documenting strange buildings, spending nights in places that still had police tape on the floor, Barney came with me. Not because I wanted to bring a dog into danger, but because he refused to stay behind. If I packed a bag, he sat on it. If I stepped out of the house, he ran after me. Eventually, I stopped trying to convince him to stay with my parents, and I take him everywhere I go now. I trained him as best I could. Not for attack work, nothing like that. I needed him to sniff things out, to alert me if something wasn't normal, to stick close and stay calm. He wears a purple bandana around his neck, mostly because it makes people smile and assume he's friendlier than he looks. But the truth is, he's my partner. He listens better than most humans I've worked with. He notices details I miss, and he never asks why we're driving out to the middle of nowhere. Most of my jobs take me far from city streets. I go where people don't want to look. Abandoned houses, empty service stations, forgotten motels with locked doors that have no keys. Some clients, they want proof that a building is safe enough to sell. Others want someone to walk through a location that scares them, even when they don't want to admit it. This one time, a landlord in Tokyo paid me to spend a night in an apartment that was supposed to be clean after a priest performed rites. My task was simple: stay until sunrise, record anything unusual, and confirm nothing followed me out. People worry about strange things, and I've learned not to laugh at any of it. Every place has a reason someone wants answers. Sometimes it's a rumor, sometimes it's real history. Old mining towns are common requests. Settlements built on bad land or rushed construction tend to have stories attached. Structures collapse. People go missing. When someone tells me a town is half buried in dust and the locals refuse to step within a mile of it, I know where that's probably where my next job is. Another type of call comes from the Cold War leftovers. Bunkers, research stations, storage facilities with sealed steel doors. Many of them were supposed to stay locked forever, yet somehow they do not. Someone breaks in. Someone reports lights where there shouldn't be lights. Someone else wants proof that whatever opened that door didn't break anything important. They hire me to camp inside, explore the place, and record every detail. The job I'm on now is one of those. A mining settlement with a long list of missing people and a bunker not too far from it that recently woke up after decades of silence. I don't know yet if the two things are connected, but someone out there thinks they might be. That's why they paid me. They want eyes on both. Before I go any further, I should explain something. I don't walk into these jobs blind. I've been doing this long enough to know that if you treat this kind of work like a joke, or worse, like it's a thrill ride, you will not be doing it for very long. You'll end up missing, hurt, or talked about in the kind of forum posts that start with, "Anybody ever hear what happened to that guy?" I'm still here because I follow my rules. I wrote them down when I was younger, after the first few jobs that didn't go as planned. They weren't clean rules at first, more like rough ideas, the kind of notes you scribble on paper scraps in the middle of the night. But over time, they got sharper. I saw what happened when I broke them, even a little, and I decided I was not going to test them again. There are 4 of them. I don't take a job unless I know I can follow all 4. If I can't, I walk away, no matter how good the money looks. And if you want to get into this type of field, you better listen close. So here they are. Let's start with rule number 1. Now, before I get into the details of the first rule, I want to explain why the rules matter so much. They are practical steps that keep me grounded when I walk into places where most people would not take a single step. Following them keeps my work simple. They also give me something steady to rely on when everything else feels unpredictable. With that in mind, the first rule grew out of real mistakes, a few scares, and advice I picked up long before I knew this would become my job. Rule 1. Obtain permission whenever possible. If not possible, apologize later. This rule has 2 sides. One is legal, and the other is the part that everyone likes to laugh at. Now, most abandoned places aren't actually free to explore. They look empty, but that doesn't mean they don't belong to someone. Buildings rot, roofs fall in, fences collapse, but the deed still exists somewhere. A company might own it, even if they forgot about it. A private owner might have inherited it and never bothered to fix anything. A city might hold the title because taxes weren't paid. Either way, walking in without permission is trespassing, and trespassing can lead to fines or getting arrested. I learned that early. Back when I first started, I assumed abandoned meant nobody cares. Turns out, plenty of people care when they see someone wandering around a structure that is technically theirs. So now I research ownership every time. I look through public records, old business filings, county databases. If I can find the owner, I contact them. I explain who I am and what I do. It sounds strange, but a lot of owners appreciate someone taking interest in their forgotten property. Some even ask for my footage afterward. Others say no, and in that case, I walk away if the line looks too clear. I pick my battles. Getting handcuffed in front of a collapsing house is not great for business. But the other side of this rule, it's not about the law anymore. It's about respect, or maybe habit. It comes from my family. My grandpa was the most superstitious person I have ever met. He grew up in rural Hungary, and he took all the culture with him when his family left for America. He treated every forest trail, broken shed, an empty field like something was already living there, and had been living there long before humans showed up. He never stepped into a space without announcing himself. He would say his name out loud, explain his purpose, and wait a moment before crossing the threshold. He taught me to do the same. When I was young, I thought it was just one of his quirks. He had a lot of them. He believed the Fae liked honey more than anything, and they stayed in forgotten places because they preferred quiet over noise. He said abandoned buildings were perfect for them because nobody bothered them there. He told me, if you're going into someone else's home, even if you can't see them, you should let them know. It sounded odd, but he said it with such seriousness that I never questioned him at the time. As I got older and started walking into my own strange places, his advice came back to me. So before I enter any site, I follow his old routine. I stand at the entrance and say my name. I explain why I'm there and what I intend to do. I ask to come in and give it a moment, even if I know I won't be getting any answers. Then I step inside. I do this even when I know the only thing in there is dust and old wood. I do it when I know the building has been empty for decades. I do it even when other people are with me, and they roll their eyes or make comments under their breath. I also bring a small offering. I carry tiny honey jars in my pack for this reason. Nothing fancy, just enough to leave behind at the doorway or on a windowsill. My grandpa used to say honey was a sign of goodwill. They notice intentions, he'd say. Give something sweet when you enter, and you won't be chased out. Now, I didn't believe him literally, but I still bring the jars. They're small, easy to pack, and they feel like a connection to someone who taught me how to look at the world differently. People do make fun of me for it. Other urban explorers, documentary teams, amateur, thrill seekers, they all react the same way. They think it's cute or strange or unnecessary. They laugh when I talk to an empty space, and they laugh harder when I leave a honey jar behind like I'm feeding invisible wildlife. But you know what? I have noticed something they never do. They trip. They twist ankles. They fall through the freaking floor sometimes. They lose their balance on stairwells. They get sick from breathing in dust. They end up in the ER with cuts, sprains, and worse. Me? I come out clean, man. No broken bones, no hospital visits. I don't even have a paper cut. Now maybe it's just dumb luck. Maybe following my grandpa's rule keeps me slow and careful, which keeps me safe. I don't have a fancy explanation for it. But what I do know is simple. When I follow this rule, things go fine. When people ignore it, things go very wrong. Barney and I have had to rescue a few idiots who fell through the floor once or twice. So remember, permission is not always available. Ownership gets murky. Records vanish. Sometimes no one alive even remembers the place you're trying to explore. In those cases, I follow the second half of the rule. Apologize later. If someone shows up angry, I explain myself plainly. I show my research and I offer to leave. I give them space to cool off. Most people respond well when you stay calm. This rule protects more than just my body, it protects the work. It keeps the process steady and predictable, even when the environment is anything but. It reminds me that I'm stepping into someone else's story, not dragging mine into theirs. It keeps me grounded. And that's why Rule 1 always comes first. You never know whose home you're stepping into out there. So be on your best visitor behavior, and you should be fine. Rule 2 is simple. Take nothing but photos, leave nothing but footprints. Most people think it means don't be an idiot, which is true. It's something you hear early in this line of work. You see it scrawled on message boards, tagged on rusted water tanks, stenciled on the backs of old explorer jackets. For most people, it's just a slogan, a reminder not to be a jerk. Don't break windows, tag walls, or leave any of your trash behind. and most of all, don't take anything. I learned it because I watched what happened to someone who ignored it. That someone was Danny. Now, Danny used to work with me sometimes. I wasn't a close friend, but we got along well enough to meet up for jobs when our schedules lined up. He had a growing YouTube channel about abandoned places, and he talked a lot about turning it into a full-time job. He had energy and ideas, and he moved quickly through every place we entered. I liked him, even if I didn't share his pace. Barney liked him too. My dog is usually cautious with strangers, but he warmed up to Danny right away. On shoots, Barney would trail after him, sniffing whatever Danny pointed out, tail wagging whenever Danny stopped long enough to give him a pat. It made our work lighter to have someone my dog trusted. We met in an abandoned hospital one afternoon. The building was 3 stories tall and mostly empty inside, with long hallways and peeling paint. I remember the sky was a dull gray. Barney walked ahead of us, checking the rooms before we stepped inside, but he always circled back to stay near my leg. The anatomy wing was on the top floor. Most of the cabinets had been opened years earlier, their contents scattered or stolen, but a few shelves still held old equipment. Danny found the skull on the back shelf. It rested there, like someone had placed it down during a normal day and never returned to finish the task. He picked it up with both hands and started explaining to his camera what it might be worth. Barney stopped walking. He lowered his head and backed up until his tail brushed my knee. He didn't bark or growl, but he watched Danny with a level of tension I'd never seen in him before. Danny laughed. He loved the camera, but he loved the idea of making an impression even more. He turned the skull toward the window, angling it so the light hit across the very top. "This is gonna do crazy numbers, man. Imagine the thumbnail," he said. I told him to leave it, but Danny brushed me off. Said it wasn't a grave. Said it was abandoned twice over, and that someone online would pay a fortune for it. He tucked it into his pack. Well, we parted ways in the parking lot. Barney jumped into the back seat of my truck without waiting for me to open the door all the way. I watched Danny walk back towards his car with a backpack slung over one shoulder, the camera still hanging from his neck. And that was the last time I saw him alive. A few months passed. I moved on to other jobs. And then on a Monday morning, I got a call from the police department in the same town where the hospital was. They asked if I knew a man named Daniel Reyes, and if I could come in to answer a few questions. They found Danny on the hospital roof. Not inside. On top. Floating in the old water tower tub that had been dry for decades. His shoes were placed neatly at the bottom of the ladder, as if he'd taken his time to line them up before climbing. There were no signs that he'd slipped, nor was there any alcohol or drugs in his system. His lungs were clear. There were no bruises on his arms or shoulders, and his hands didn't show any sign that he had tried to fight for air. But his right ear had been torn off. That was the phrase written in the report. Torn off. The coroner said that it was odd to have a wound so violent and yet have no signs of struggle anywhere else on the body. They searched the roof and the ground around the building and never found the missing ear. The detective told me they were classifying it as an international drowning caused by psychological distress. They found a note in his jacket pocket that they believed explained everything. The note was short. The handwriting was shaky and tilted, the way it looks when a hand can't stop shaking. Danny wrote that something had been following him for weeks. He said it had 3 eyes, 3 arms, and 3 feet. He said it stood behind him when he slept and waited for him to notice. He wrote that it didn't speak, but he could feel it breathing against him, and that it knew him now. Those were his last words. The detective called it psychosis brought on by an erratic lifestyle. The lawyers called it an unfortunate accident. Everyone agreed it was tragic, and that was the end of the file. I didn't argue. There was nothing I could have said that would have changed how they filed the paperwork. I just nodded, signed my statement, and left. Barney was quiet for a long time after that. When we went on jobs, he stayed close, and he checked every doorway before letting me through. He paused more often than before, especially in places that felt old or wrong. I started trusting his judgment more than my own. Dogs don't explain things, but they don't lie either. Whatever happened to Danny had left a mark on both of us, even if neither of us had been there to see it. And now I don't touch anything I don't need to. I don't have souvenirs, even small ones. I don't move objects for better camera angles. I don't pocket keys or photos or papers to look at later. When Barney hesitates, we turn around. If he refuses to step forward, we leave. People online talk about Danny's death sometimes. They call it strange. They argue about the details. Some say the story doesn't make sense, that the missing ear was an exaggeration or a lie. Others say the note was a forgery. It had become one of those unexplainable mysteries. And to this day, it's unsolved. Rule 3 is never go in alone. People hear that and think it's about teamwork or safety or being prepared for accidents. And they're right in part. Abandoned places aren't kind. Floors rot from the inside out. Ceilings give without warning. And one wrong step can turn a good day into a rescue call that never comes. But that's not why the rule exists. Not entirely. It's about having someone or something to keep you aware. Someone who can look where you can't, listen when you are distracted, or tell you when you've stayed too long. In my case, that someone is Barney. We've been doing this together since before I started taking jobs for money. He's trained to pick up things I miss. Movement, sense, changes in temperature, anything unusual. He gives me confidence in places that would otherwise feel too still. And when I talk to him, it keeps me grounded. It's easy to forget how strange a place can sound when you're alone, but talking out loud makes it manageable. Most explorers don't have that. They prefer going solo. Some do it for the challenge, others do it because it feels braver that way, like proof of authenticity for their followers online. It's good content. A single flashlight beam moving through a dark hallway gets better clicks than two people joking about camera angles. I see their posts sometimes. Footage of half-collapsed schools, burned houses, factories, asylums. They walk in with headlamps and GoPros strapped to their chest, narrating as if their audience is right behind them. It looks cinematic until you realize that one wrong board could give way under their weight. Then it stops looking brave and it looks stupid. When I first started, I thought those people were reckless. Now I just think they're young. I remember being that kind of young too, thinking the rules were flexible, that caution was optional, that the bad things only happen to other people. But you learn or you don't. Barney is my ears when the wind picks up, my eyes when the light fades. And sometimes he's the only reason I know when to leave. A single sound from him, a growl or a whine, or even the way he stops walking, is enough for me to trust that we're done. Still, not everyone follows the rule. This one night, I found myself at a bar near the edge of town, kind of place where there's locals and travelers. I'd finished a job that afternoon, a simple inspection gig for a warehouse that hadn't been opened in like 30 years, and I wanted something warm to eat that didn't come out of a can. Barney sat on the floor by my legs, head down and snoring peacefully. The place was half full. A few regulars leaned over their drinks, and a group of tourists filled the corner booth. Their jackets were covered in dust, and their camera bags sat piled beside the table. I didn't need to ask what they did. I could tell. Urban explorers always recognize their own. Made sense, I thought. It was the season for it. There were always more of us gathered around during the summer. Well, I sat at the bar, ordered a meal, and listened to a group of people who more or less invited me to join them and chat. The group started talking about a story they'd heard while hiking earlier that day. It was a local legend. Something about a mountain north of town where a man had gone missing years ago. According to them, he hadn't gone missing alone. He'd been climbing with a friend, got caught in a blizzard, and the friend never came back. When they finally found the man, he wasn't the same. The group's tone shifted when they reached that part. They lowered their voices, but still spoke loud enough for me to catch the words. They said the man had eaten his companion to survive. They said the land was cursed, and that when rescue finally came, what they found wasn't a man anymore, but something else. One of them said it had 3 eyes, 3 arms, and 3 feet. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. The explorers laughed it off after a while. They said people still saw it near the woods sometimes, that it watched hikers from the ridge line or followed anyone who whistled after dark. They called it a local myth, one of those stories every small town has to keep kids from wandering too far. They joked that they might go looking for it tomorrow for exclusive footage. The bartender rolled his eyes, and he told them that kind of talk was bad luck. He said the locals don't go near that mountain, not even during the day. When they noticed me, one of them asked if I believed in the story. I told them no, but asked them where they'd heard about it. The tallest one said it came from a ranger they'd met at a gas station. I finished my meal, paid my tab, and stepped outside. Barney stood up when he saw me, wagging his tail. The night air felt still, and across the street, the woods formed a dark shape against the edge of town. As we walked back to the motel, I kept thinking about that legend, the man who had eaten his friend, the blizzard, and the curse. I had heard similar stories before, but not with details that matched Danny's description so precisely. 3 arms, 3 eyes, 3 feet. Barney brushed against my leg, and I looked down at him. He glanced up at me once, then kept walking, nose to the ground. He didn't seem bothered. "Yeah, don't worry, boy, we're not doing anything stupid," I said as I scratched him. I told myself it was just another story. Every place has one. Every explorer hears dozens. But still, when we reached the room, I double-checked the locks and made sure my gear was packed. Barney settled by the door like he always does. I sat on the bed and wrote down everything I'd heard. The details, the names, the description. I didn't know what to call it yet, coincidence or warning, but it didn't matter. I'd learned that ignoring patterns in this line of work led to trouble. Months passed before I heard of the same monster again. That brings me to rule 4. Always do a recon. Yeah, this one sounds boring, I know. It's not dramatic like the other rules. But honestly, this is the one that saved me the most. I tell people all the time, don't get excited until you've seen it in person. Unless I'm sure that something is going to be a slam dunk, which is rare, I plan a recon trip. It's like scouting a campsite before spending the night there. You don't just show up in the dark and hope for the best. I try to do this as early as possible, because there's nothing worse than spending hours researching a cool abandoned site, hyping it up to your friends, driving 90 miles out of state, and then realize you're staring at an empty dirt lot. That exact thing happened to me once. I'd been planning for weeks to visit an old brick factory just outside Columbus. I had maps, drone shots, photos from a forum. I even convinced a friend to tag along. We get there, and all that's left is a parking lot. A brand new one. Turns out the whole place had been torn down just a month earlier. That trip cost me gas, lunch, and a good mood. But it also taught me something important. You can't trust the internet. Photos go out of date fast. 1 year can mean the difference between a haunting, half-collapsed structure, and a clean stretch of pavement. So I started scouting every site in person before making a plan. Sometimes that means driving out early in the morning and walking the perimeter. Sometimes it means talking to a neighbor or someone at a nearby business, anything to make sure it's still there. But recon isn't just about checking if something's there. It's about making sure it's safe enough to enter. A lot of newcomers don't get that. They find an address on some message board, read an article or two, and think that's enough. They don't check the floors. They don't check the structure. They don't test for soft ground or weak ceilings. And that's how people get trapped, or worse. The internet doesn't tell you when the floorboards have given out, or when the lower levels have flooded. I once heard about a pair of explorers who followed a set of old directions into an abandoned theater. The main floor had collapsed years ago, but no one had updated the post they used. Well, they fell straight through and had to be pulled out 12 hours later. One of them broke both legs. And that's why I do recon. Every single time. The last time I ignored my own rule, I ended up pulling someone else out of a mess. It started with a message on my blog from a teenager named Nathan. He said he'd found a site a few towns over, a former office complex that had been shuttered since the 90s, and wanted to know if I'd checked it out. I hadn't. Wasn't on my list. But something in his message told me he wasn't asking just out of curiosity. He mentioned weird noises and a bad feeling. Well, I drove out there that afternoon, and the building was exactly the kind you expect to find in the middle of nowhere. It was plain, square, gray, half the windows broken. A small fence circled the perimeter, but half of it had been flattened by a fallen tree. Barney hopped out of the truck and started sniffing along the fence line. When I called Nathan's number, I heard it ring from inside. And that's when I knew he hadn't just been visiting, he'd gone in. I found him about 20 minutes later. Part of the ceiling had collapsed in one of the hallways, trapping him in a corner between two steel beams. He was terrified, but thankfully unhurt. Dust covered his jacket, and his flashlight had gone out. Couldn't have been more than 16, this kid. "All right, don't move, I'll get you out," I said. The collapse wasn't severe. A large metal support beam had fallen across the doorway, but I could see a small gap near the top. All I needed was leverage. I went back outside to grab my crowbar, and when I returned, Barney was lying near the entrance, ears twitching. He wasn't barking, but he was watching something deeper in the hall. I didn't see anything at first. The building was silent except for the sound of Nathan. And then I heard a scrape. A slow dragging. I crouched down beside Nathan and I put a finger to my lips. He nodded. And through the gap in the debris, I saw movement. At first, I thought it was another explorer. The shape was wrong, though. Its back was hunched in a way that looked painful. It stepped into the light spilling from the window, and I saw it clearly. 3 eyes, all set in a line across the face. 3 arms, long and bent in strange directions. 3 legs that didn't quite move right. And the worst part was that it had two heads, conjoined at the shoulders, splitting apart at the torso, like something that had once been one and had decided to separate halfway through. It was dragging a deer carcass by one arm. The body was half-eaten, ribs exposed. It left a dark trail behind as it walked. Nathan's eyes widened, but I slapped my hand over his mouth before he could breathe a single sound. Barney stayed silent. The creature stopped near the end of the hallway, tilted one of its heads, and sniffed the air. And then it kept moving until it disappeared around the corner. I waited another full minute before I spoke. Okay, we stay quiet, and we're leaving. I wedged the crowbar under the fallen beam and pushed very carefully. It took both hands and most of my weight, but the metal shifted just enough for Nathan to crawl through. And we got out of there as fast as we could. I drove the kid home to his parents myself. I didn't report what I saw, at least not yet. A month later, I drove past that same building again. The whole lot was fenced off, and a large sign out front said it was under development for a new resort. I talked to one of the foremen standing by the gate, and he said they'd already had problems. Equipment breaking, workers injured, a small fire nobody could explain. A couple of people had been driven to the ER just that week. All broken bones due to an unexplainable equipment failure. After a few days, I couldn't shake it. Every time I thought about that building, I saw the thing standing there with a deer in its hand. I told myself it wasn't my problem anymore, that I'd done my part by getting Nathan out. But that didn't hold up. The news about the construction accidents kept coming in. Tools going missing, scaffolding collapsing. A worker breaking his leg after falling through a stairwell that had already been inspected. It felt wrong to know and stay quiet. So I sat down one night and wrote an email. I didn't use my real name. I created a new address, something generic, and I sent them 3 separate messages. One to a construction foreman, one to the listed property owner, and one to the local police. I told them what I'd seen. I wrote about the old building, about Daniel Reyes and his death, about the pattern of injuries happening now. I included a rough map of the area and a short note warning them not to work there after dark. I didn't use the word creature. I said something dangerous. I figured that would make it seem less like a joke. Before hitting send, I sat with the draft for a long time. My hands hovered over the keyboard. But then I thought about Danny, about Nathan, about the blood on the floor, and the trail that thing left behind. So I sent them all. Never got a response. Not from anyone. But that was fine. I didn't write them to get a reply. I did it because I couldn't sit and just hold that information. It was the only way I could live with what I'd seen. Though a couple days later, I heard the place had been officially sealed off by the city mayor. Well, it's been a few months since the thing at the construction site. Barney and I keep moving. We take jobs, quiet, small ones. I don't post anything online like the others. I'm not one for the cameras. I do write, though. Not for an audience, not really. Just on a small Reddit forum where people like me trade stories and half-believed encounters. It's part habit, part diary. I don't share everything, just the parts that help me think. The parts that remind me why the rules exist. Some people read it. They assume I'm making it all up. That's fine. Maybe I am in their world. I've been hearing about this new place lately. Somewhere out in West Texas, off a forgotten highway, where the land dips into a dry river basin. A few posts mentioned strange noises at night, livestock going missing, search parties losing their bearings. One hiker claimed to have seen something moving in the brush, something tall and watching. 3 eyes, 3 arms, and 3 feet. I don't know if it's the same thing, but it sure sounds like it. And I want to find out. So I'm heading there next week. It's reckless, probably stupid, but this work does not let you rest easy when there's still questions. I'll take the rules, and I'll take my chances.